Chapter 986. When Zhang Yingying circled around the dangerous coastline, she threw away the jet ski and arrived by Luo Nan's side while gasping for breath. Zeolite Beach, the somewhat famous high-class private resort beach in T-City, had already changed beyond recognition. In the forefront region, Shi Xinhe piloted the Deep Blue Walker experimental machine and Meng Chong, who was practically burning from head to toe. Both sides were warrior types, especially Meng Chong. He could be considered a powerful fleshly expert. But right now, they didn't display any exquisite combat techniques. They just collided with each other in the most primitive way. Even so, violent energy erupted from them, shaking the beach. Sand and stones flew everywhere, blotting out the sky. And on Zhang Yingying's side, especially when she looked at the beach from Luo Nan's position, she couldn't help but have a similar feeling to a certain someone before. This was basically a chess sandbox, or a chess game. Everyone on the beach was like a chessboard. There was no subjective initiative. Luo Nan just set up the formation, and everyone occupied their positions. They tapped and moved, released a move, and calculated the ball. Luo Nan seemed to be pondering his next move. He didn't make any moves. Zhang Yingying didn't have time to think too much. She didn't come all the way here to watch the show. She had received a message from Her Majesty Empress Wu. She had come to deliver a message. The boss is afraid of disturbing you, so she told me to tell you. Most of the others are tactful. She will help you keep an eye on things. Take control of the situation yourself. Don't be too hasty. Don't let certain people lead the tempo. Certain people? Luo Nan had a general idea of the fluctuating threads of telepathy in the Abyss region, but he really didn't know the specifics. Well, some are fine, but some are restless. Halfway through her words, she stuck out her tongue. It was unknown if Her Majesty Empress Wu was warning her from afar, but she didn't continue speaking. But she couldn't hold it in for a few seconds. She still actively hinted. It's just a few of the diamond type. Diamond? Luo Nan understood quite well at first, but Zhang Yingying's words confused him. You're behind the times. Forget it. I'll talk about it later. Don't get distracted. Luo Nan didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly. It had to be said that he had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. Compared to the time in Xia City, the heavyweight audience members were quite polite today. Or could it be that Luo Nan had basically reached the point of not being surprised by this level? Her Majesty Empress Wu's reminder was timely, and Luo Nan's control was spot on. Most importantly, the sand table, which had been continuously remodeled, and the chess pieces, which had been trained for several hours, gradually possessed the embryonic form of a three-way confrontation he needed. Luo Nan was pursuing a relatively sealed temporal structure. Once the basic form was right, the spatial distortion and sealing effect would naturally appear. It had a certain shielding effect on those curious or ill-intentioned prying eyes. Now that the cage theory was trending, forcible spying and contact on the mental level could be described as sexual harassment, which had a considerable theoretical basis. A similar thought flashed through his mind, but he quickly suppressed it. Luo Nan continued to watch the sand table in front of him. While most people were still attracted by the wrestling on the beach, they did not know that the real main body of the confrontation was the invisible domain structure on the beach and the fog on the ocean that had begun to roll and disperse. Meng Chong represented the Hellfire Tyrant type of attack power. Though it was a bit specious, it still completed the oppressive task quite well at this stage. It was like a heavy hammer, smashing the originally loose domain structure into a deformed state. It was more tenacious than before. So much so that the people on the beach finally had a bit of the posture of the bloodshed land. Luo Nan took advantage of this and used the syncopator to glue them together. He used a portion of his fantasy mimicry configuration to make them more and more in line with the basic form of a relay station in his dream. As for the mica mother constructed by the sea fog on the outside, it was undoubtedly far inferior to the true body. It was this disparity that caused the collision between the two to produce a serious deviation from the appearance in Luo Nan's memories. But it didn't matter. Only by discovering the deviation could he begin to correct it. Luo Nan actually felt that the difficulty of his current work had dropped. From his perspective, the preparatory work before was like making proofs and building models. It was like the last big question on a math exam. If he knew it, he knew it. If he didn't know it, he didn't know it. Everything had to be created from nothing. Everything had to be logically complete. And now, he finally had a basic framework to refer to. He also had a few plausible answers to choose from. It was similar to a multiple-choice question. Of course, he could save quite a bit of brainpower. It didn't matter if he made a mistake for a moment. No one would deduct points. At worst, he could just start over if a piece collapsed. And this was a bit like the situation in the Misty Maze. Luo Nan was even more familiar with this sort of piecemeal puzzle work. With Luo Nan's current mobilization of computing power, his advancement speed was quite fast. He had a clearer understanding of the basic configuration and outline of the mica mother. Of course, it was impossible for him to achieve everything in one go. Luo Nan never had such extravagant hopes. He just wanted to solidify his foundation a bit more. He didn't want to do a complete simulation on a large scale. Instead, he wanted to make a true leap. He wanted to take that step from the relatively simple saturated structure of water vapor in the material plane to the living plane. Cough. He was clearly thinking too much. He didn't need to truly act on the material state. He just needed to make a false leap on the configuration plane. He was quite satisfied with silly sand stable substrate simulation configuration that could withstand the test. He couldn't possibly hope to forcefully create a magnetic optic mica. With this sort of standard in mind, Luo Nan felt that he wasn't too far from achieving his goal. He had this sort of feeling. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The leap was a kind of qualitative change. It was just a bit more. Perhaps it would require a much greater accumulation than before. It was even possible that he would have to start over from scratch. But Luo Nan had an intense premonition. It was an intuition built upon the foundation of a solid configuration design. Perhaps this was where the spirituality of the school of fantasy lay. The direction shouldn't be wrong. It was just a bit more. Then he had to do his work a bit more solidly. Zhang Yingying narrowed her eyes to the side. She half covered her forehead with her palm, blocking the violent whirlwind and sand that assaulted her face. She did her best to lock onto the position of her son, but she couldn't help but worry. The only thing that made her feel at ease was that the chess pieces on the sand table, aside from the two at the very front, were all obediently staying in the background. They wouldn't step on silly sand at all. But she didn't know what would happen next. Zhang Yingying turned her head, wanting to ask a question, but she forcefully restrained herself for fear of causing a disturbance. The current Luo Nan felt like a focused conductor. He flicked his fingers and swung his arms in the air of nothingness. His movements weren't large, but he was very restrained and very calm. But he was much more invested than his previous attitude of watching with cold eyes. She couldn't see any corresponding changes on the sand table, but Zhang Yingying furrowed her brows and raised her head to look at the sky. The sky was overcast. The sun had been able to barely pierce through the layer of mist and clouds, showing off some of its existence. But after the whirlwind of sand and pebbles, the sun was completely hidden behind the layer of clouds. Actually, the boundaries of the cloud layer were nearly impossible to see. There was only a gloomy, leaden expanse. Zhang Yingying could still feel that the humidity of the atmosphere had clearly increased. The air pressure was dropping as well. This should be a process of continuous development. It was just that it had been suppressed by the momentum of the sweeping sandstorm earlier. It was only now that it was barely manifested. And these weren't the main points. Zhang Yingying discovered that the most crucial factor in this series of changes was thunder. She muttered. She wasn't too sure because the vibrations in the atmosphere were far too weak. Perhaps it was just a misconception. Oh, a misconception. F***ck. Zhang Yingying jumped in fright. She never thought that Luo Nan would be able to hear her muttering to herself at this time. Luo Nan chatted with her, "Don't get distracted. It's fine. I'm quite focused. Also, there are times when the atmosphere is very fragile." Huh? Luo Nan laughed and continued with his previous actions. It looked like he really was quite relaxed. A few seconds later, he even pursed his lips and began to whistle. He clearly didn't have much technique. His whistle was a bit hoarse at first, but his extraordinary control over his fleshly body helped him quickly find the right path. The whistle grew clearer and clearer. Later on, it struck together with the surging sandstorm, causing it to be particularly intense. It was quite fitting for the current situation on the beach. But later on, the gradually lengthened and turned low. It seemed to be a bit spacious and desolate. This bro's mood. Huh? Zhang Yingying didn't know what to use to describe it for a time. When he whistled, his mind should be relaxed and his mood good. But she just couldn't experience a similar feeling. The melody isn't bad. What song is it? A new song composed by Sister Moya. Zhang Yingying quietly used the ability to recognize songs by listening, but she didn't gain anything. Hum whatever. Luo Nan also paused to reply. He didn't even know how he had hummed. He had whistled out. Yes, it was Wei Siyi's song, Scarlet Wheel. Clearly, he had been infected by Liang Lu. Liang Lu was focused on her work. She would do this when she was in a good mood. Luo Nan didn't really like it at first. From his perspective, the concert would draw other thoughts and disturb his normal work. But Liang Lu spoke eloquently. She said that the School of Creation was most proficient in precise planning. She divided the brain. She needed a buffer or a metronome to effectively plan the pace of the task. In any case, she had ample theoretical support. Luo Nan didn't comment at the time, but now he suddenly felt, not bad. He searched for the feeling, pursed his lips, and whistled. It was the song that he didn't quite understand the meaning of. Amidst this ear-scratching yet unfamiliar tune, he seemed to have returned to the relay station in his days. He was at his own workstation, in that sealed yet unexpectedly fulfilling environment. He faced countless broken machines, and he was next to interesting and reliable comrades. He made the incomplete become whole, and he made the damaged reconstruct and renovate. Everything was very familiar. It flowed smoothly, and it wasn't dull. It was as if he could work endlessly until the entire base was full of vitality and operation. Well, there weren't such workstations in reality. There was such a base. Even comrades seemed to be nothing more than refactoring code in the void. But right now, there were indeed innumerable incorporeal structures before Luo Nan's eyes. They slowly shifted and changed. They worked in harmony, causing a marvelous force to faintly give birth. Even though there were many discords within, the incorporeal structures rubbed against each other, shaking and vibrating until the cacophony was jumbled and the dark hummed. Chapter 987. The dark clouds on the coastline quickly spread inland, and the sky above T-City quickly darkened. Of course, this was meaningless in the room where the curtains were still closed. Instead of looking out of the window, it was better to spend more effort to think about the moods of his parents. In a villa at the edge of the city, the party had already ended a long time ago. After a night of noise and venting, most of the people had already exhausted all their energy and hormones. Those who needed to leave had already left, and those who were left were those who had overplayed themselves. They were sprawled on the sofa, the floor, the bathroom, the side of the pool, and some were even floating on the water surface. Their clothes were disheveled, and some had even been soaked in alcohol to the point of stupidity. They were sleeping like dead dogs. These were all people with good fortune. They only cared about playing and went to sleep after they were done playing. The host squandered a lot of money and found beautiful women and handsome men from all over T-City, ensuring that every guest who attended the party would have a heaven-like enjoyment. Even the special service staff who were hired could earn a lot of money that far exceeded the standard. This was a situation where everyone was happy. However, no matter what kind of group it was, there would always be a few unlucky people. For example, the beautiful dealer who was so sleepy that she was about to smash her head on the gambling table, and the masseuse who was also sleepy but still had to smile and work hard to massage the shoulders and legs of the guests. Perhaps this also included the two professional managers who were just there to make up for the occasion and had almost been stripped naked. They were even worse than the service staff around them. They drank too much, stayed up too late, were overly excited, and were overly afraid. Now, they didn't even know what cards they were playing. Fortunately, the two real big shots at the table were just casually playing with the atmosphere. Now, one of the big shots had already started to yawn in a half-serious and half-fake manner. At the moment, his image wasn't much better than the men and women who were playing with him. He had a cigarette in his mouth and was only wearing a pair of underpants. There was a red wine stain that had already dried up on his chest. The most eye-catching thing was on his forehead. Next to his eyebrows, there were a few thick and long parallel lines drawn horizontally across his forehead. It looked like the wrinkles on the forehead drawn by the worst artist. There was also a line of words at the top of the line. I'm a blood demon. I'm a sand sculpture. As a dignified extraordinary blood demon, he had led a wolf into his house. Now, the female wolf opposite him seemed to be happy, but he had a favor to ask, so he was too embarrassed to ask her to stop. He could only roll his eyes and continue playing. Of course, he had to find some way to hint at it. There's no end to the seaside. It's fine if these researchers are used to stretching the battle line, but none of them know how to speak human language. It's as if they're afraid that they won't be able to intimidate others. Opposite him was a woman wearing typical nightclub makeup. It was so thick that it almost drowned out her own uniqueness. She was not much different from the other female attendants in the room. If one had to find something different, then this lady was probably the most well-dressed person in the villa. So far, she had only taken off her jacket, revealing a shirt that revealed her shoulders. His shoulder-length, slightly curly black hair swayed slightly on his fair, fleshy shoulders. At the same time, the hands of the unlucky masseuse were also slowly massaging this area. Her delicate and well-maintained hands rubbed against the snow-white, tight flesh. Overall, it was quite pleasing to the eye. The blood demon, however, was not in the mood to look at him. He glanced at the change in the man's expression and laughed. But this is good too. With this guy as a comparison, our business with visual impact will definitely make a lot of money. Unable to stand the blood demon's absurd logic, the lady in heavy makeup finally spoke. Because you came up with the idea of selling poker cards instead of a magazine? How much are you going to sell a deck of cards for? What do you mean by deputy? We're talking about cards. As I expected, you're still selling poker cards. You invited me to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine. Have I become the director of a printing factory? I'm the deputy editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief can only be me. While smoking, the blood demon rubbed the two cards in his hands back and forth, as if he were showing off his bright future. We're just going to change the format, and the worthless, ragged magazine will be reborn in flames. Why? Because we're a match made in heaven. Thud. The pen that was used to pay for the bet brushed past the blood demon's ear and pierced through the wall behind him. Because it was so fast, nobody else felt it at all. They only thought that the thing had been thrown to an invisible corner. What the F***ck? The blood demon instinctively wanted to curse, but when he saw the cold, disdainful glint under the thick eyeshadow of the other party, the latter part of his sentence was blurred. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. I'm just saying that with your psychic abilities as an endorsement, my extraordinary style control, and a topical poker card ranking, this magazine will be an authoritative information release organization in the future. Its name will go down in history. You're in such a hurry to enter history. Are you tired of living? The lady in heavy makeup mocked. Her slender fingers moved nimbly, and the two cards that had already formed a black jack shuttled back and forth between her fingers. From the looks of it, you bought the Cards magazine because you're really prepared to go all out? I thought you just wanted to torture these two pitiful wretches. On the other side, the two professional managers who were also the former managers of the Cards magazine were about to collapse under the gambling table. They didn't even have the strength to smile. They were also people from the inner world, and they more or less had some reputation. However, after a night of tormenting by the side of two extraordinaries, both their bodies and minds had been worn out. At this time, the blood demon looked over with a smile. Frankly speaking, we did have some similar considerations. Do you know why, former chief editor? The former chief editor answered absent-mindedly, we've already switched to hearts. 10 hearts. The blood demon very seriously corrected the details. I won't talk about the problem of you placing me in the diamonds suit, but why did you exclude me from the character card series after switching to hearts? And it was behind Marlon. Are you expressing your dissatisfaction? There are 80 to 90 extraordinaries in the world, and you only chose half of them. That's already bold enough. You arranged seats for everyone and made it even fatter. In the end, you even expressed such obvious discrimination in the seating arrangement. Do you have a severe fatty liver? If it weren't for me, Lord Blood Demon, disregarding my reputation and coming out to turn the tide, to what extent were you prepared to magnify this directional error? This wasn't the first time the two, former editor-in-chief, had heard the exact same words. This time, the former editor-in-chief finally rolled his eyes and fell backward. In a show of loyalty, he knocked down his old partner. The two of them fell off the gambling table and fell unconscious. The lady in heavy makeup continued to skillfully switch the cards, turning a blind eye to the situation. Marlon was able to enter the character card series because of his status as the first vice president. This blessing. As for you, where did you get the courage to place yourself in the top 16 of the extraordinaries? This is just a gossip magazine. Isn't it good to be a topic of conversation? The blood demon, on the other hand, was in the right. It's fine if the spade suit didn't choose me, but they threw a law-abiding citizen like me into the diamond with people like Apollon, Nick, and Corny. Shouldn't they give me an explanation? Oh, that's right. There's also Poseidon, a mutant. The lady in heavy makeup looked at him seriously and reminded him, I'm the two of diamonds. 2 is a good position. A newcomer with potential, a god in every version. He can soar into the sky at any time. It doesn't matter which suit he is. Just like the 4 aces, aren't they exclusive to the 4 leaders of the 3 churches? The blood demon blinked in reply. Of course, if you really mind, that's even better. We'll immediately form an Avengers alliance and take this shitty magazine. Sorry, I don't step on shit. It's just a description. This is a career. A great career that reshuffles the cards in the world. Think about it. You're a deputy editor and have the right to decide the suit and number of the cards. Don't you want to change the position of some people? The blood demon hid the cards in his hand completely and winked at the other side. Think about it. You definitely have your own ideas. That's true. For example, the old witch has done so many bad things in the dark. Why should she be in the plum blossom sequence and be a spiritual grandmaster, while I have to be on the same level as a mutant? Ha, ha ha. Anyway, that's right. Mr. Blood Demon, who was obviously at a disadvantage in the game, used his loud voice as a cover to wipe the bottom of the thigh of the beautiful dealer beside him. When the latter let out a rather slow and muffled groan, he pulled his hand back and blew at the corner of his mouth. We're going to turn the world upside down. We're going to win. The 2 thin cards were thrown down with a loud bang. On the green velvet gambling table, the open and hidden cards that had already been distributed, and even the old and new cards that had already been stacked, all of them trembled, and it was as if they were fried and flipped over, the kind that flipped over. Oh my, I've used too much force. But it's this force that gives me the ability to turn stone into gold, ha 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 ha. In his insincere reaction, the surreal scene that Blood Demon single-handedly created caused the female dealer by the gambling table to be dumbfounded, and she began to doubt her life. It also scared the masseuse on the other side. As she cried out in surprise, she withdrew her hand and retreated, but the lady with thick makeup in front of her pressed down on the back of her hand and placed it on her shoulder. The masseuse's right hand was grabbed, and she quickly reacted to the situation. "I'm sorry, Madame Mora." As she spoke, she tried to withdraw her hand, but Madame Mora who was in front of her pressed down on her hand with surprising strength. She even had the extra strength to use her thumb to gently caress the back of her hand. The masseuse was a little surprised, but she could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. She immediately made the most professional choice. As if nothing had happened, she even put back her left hand that she had already withdrawn and continued with her previous work. As for what would happen to the nature of her work after this, it was not something that she could control. Generally speaking, she did not reject having sex with the female clients she served, as long as the money was sufficient. For a client like Madame Mora who was not bad-looking and whose skin was so good that it was against the rules, it was practically an extra privilege in the workplace. Even though everything before his eyes was a little magical. Why, only a little? Chapter 988. The masseuse was a little absent-minded. Perhaps it was because of this that she felt something extra in her hand. It was sensitive and enjoyable. There was also an indescribable sourness that stirred in her hand. Right at this moment, Madame Mora's voice traveled into her ears again. "Our physiques are very similar. We are both of medium height, but our bodies are fit, huh? Lipstick is the same color, and perfume is similar. Perhaps we have the same hobby. Do you like to work out?" Madame Mora casually played with the cards in her hand and threw them back onto the gambling table. She looked like she could not be bothered to communicate with the owner who had no gambling ethics, but her interest in the latter part of the game increased. With the magical scene in front of her, the masseuse could not help but feel a little nervous. "Working out? Ah, yes. How many times do you do your maintenance every week?" Two times. Your makeup is not bad. Which type of sunscreen do you use? Foundation? Hair removal fluid? Bra? The series of questions completely confused the masseuse. The question that could have been easily answered had now become a stumbling block. At the end of the day, these were all female instincts. In the end, she still managed to finish answering. Madame Mora nodded. "You're really diligent. Unfortunately, other than deceiving yourself, there is no other effect." The masseuse was speechless. Blood Demon cackled at the gambling table. "You're doing this again." "I'm just stating the facts. Clear lines, big pores, lots of color spots, a lot of oil, oh, and body hair and body odor. Sorry, I'm just that sensitive. Especially since you look a little like a middle-aged woman I know." Mora's thumb rubbed the back of the masseuse's hand all the way to her wrist before she let go. In the end, she even shook her hand and shrugged, making the exposed areas of her body more dynamic and lively. She also made a perfect counterexample. "Are you envious? Clean, cool, soft, and flawless. Are you jealous? Once you lose your youth, you can never get it back. Before you have the time to fill your heart, all the actions you take after that will only be meaningless struggles in despair. You will never be able to achieve the goal that you're envious of and jealous of. You can't even hope for her to sink to your level. In this case, it's right to be jealous. Rich psychological activities are the highest level of your body and mind. Of course, it will never satisfy you. It will only become a joke to others, such as me." The masseuse stood there dumbfounded, momentarily forgetting to be angry. She had no idea what to do next. The Blood Demon rolled his eyes. "What are you talking about? He's been through a lot. Even though he's no match for you in every aspect, he might be mentally stronger than you. If I had known that you were still so vile, I would have found an ability user for you. It would be best if it was a physical one." "Oh. Didn't you say it before? Mortals are unsightly, awakened ones are starting to improve, architects are barely decent, and extraordinaries are only cute. The problem is that my business here has just started, so I can't get Wu Jiong to massage your shoulders, right?" That's a very good hope. Emola laughed loudly. Her dark red lip gloss and snow-white teeth formed an extremely beautiful visual effect. Even though she did not have the reserved demeanor of a woman, she was the side that the blood demon admired the most. However, Emola quickly shook her head. Compared to a metal rock that I can't bite through, I'd rather find a more tender one. A boy is fine too, as long as it tastes good. Hee hee, you must have been dumped by a martial monarch, and you just haven't found the cooking method yet. So you've taken a fancy to the most tender extraordinaries. Not so long ago, you were the synonym for tender. Tender? You're talking about Luo Nan? Emola extended her hand and waved at the blood demon. The blood demon understood and flicked a cigarette over. Originally, it should have been the masseuse's turn to display her value, but the latter was completely lifeless. She had no reaction at all. Emola didn't mind. She held the cigarette in her mouth, and the tip of the cigarette automatically lit up without any movement. This is a new dish that's still endlessly adding ingredients to the pot. The recipe looks pretty good, they're clearly playing chess, okay. No matter how much they tried to downplay the matter on Zeolite Beach, in reality, they would pay attention to it. The only difference was the depth of the matter. Let's not talk about other things, but the method of stimulating the blood flame order is really quite interesting. The pattern is novel, and the posture is beautiful. The blood demon wanted to have a good discussion with Emola. Why don't you give him a segment or something? Speaking of which, he's also a psychic. Wouldn't it be easier for you to make a judgment? After all, the newest edition of the poker game, the magazine, was about to be released into the market. How to position the rising star that came out of nowhere would determine the authority of the ranking to a large extent. Even if he was playing, authority was necessary. He forcefully bought the magazine for fun, not to act like a clown. Emola puffed out a cloud of smoke. I said he's a noob, but you insisted on playing chess. Fine, he can also be considered a chef, an interesting chef. Just thinking about it makes one want to eat him, but not now. Yep, there's one more thing that needs to be emphasized. Not all extraordinaries are cute and easy to eat. Some people are destined to be the representatives of decay and ugliness, as well as the piggy banks of jealousy and hatred. Stop, stop, stop. The blood demon hurriedly called for a halt. Words and deeds are bound to be marked. I know that you and the damned witch are absolutely irreconcilable, but can you not cause trouble for me? I'm a person with property now, and I can't afford to be tormented, especially by two psychics. She's far away in Bu City, but her disciple is in T City. You can go and torment him to vent your anger. The Star Witch is also in T City. That's quite filial. Also, I didn't say it was her. You said it. Emola took a deep breath, and the cigarette in his hand burned to the bottom. He then puffed it out, and the smoke was like an arrow, hitting the blood demon's face. He then stood up. Unfortunately, I'm just passing by and can't stay for long. I'm leaving. The blood demon did not mind, but he found it strange. It's rare for T City to be so lively. Since you're here, why aren't you joining in? I'm visiting my relatives, and I'm eager to go home. You're a cursed loner, what relatives do you have? It can't be a blood connection. That's very much like a psychic. Sorry, I won't answer your personal questions. Emola did not continue chatting. She took her jacket and kissed the masseuse's cheek. She then strode out of the room. Behind the door, she suddenly turned around and smiled. She pointed her finger at her lips and blew another kiss at the masseuse. Bye-bye, Granny. I hope there's another person who hates me in this world. After she finished speaking, her figure flashed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. F***CK. The blood demon finally came back to his senses. He jumped up and wanted to run, but he was still too late. The restraints that Emola had placed on the masseuse previously broke silently due to the time limit and the strength of the restraints, and the last of the spirit waves spread out. The sinister thoughts that came from an unknown and distant region were like mushrooms that grew rapidly on rotten roots after rain. They quickly appeared on the masseuse's body and moved her eyeballs slightly in their sockets. She looked over coldly. Damn it! The blood demon cursed in his heart, but he quickly controlled his expression. He smiled widely at the masseuse, who had become a temporary parasite. Granny Wu, why are you so free to come over? Brother Star Sorcerer, it must be tiring to be your signal tower every day. The masseuse stared at him and opened her mouth, but no sound came out. In reality, she had said, it was just that her spirit and body were not in harmony. Her thoughts and body were not synchronized. The blood demon did not find it strange. Even if this damned witch was the strongest shaman in the world, it was too difficult for her to break through the restrictions set up by an extraordinary shaman and control an unfamiliar body from such a long distance away. She had to go through 2 transmissions and break through the restrictions set up by an extraordinary shaman. The Death Witch, who was also the Granny Wu in his mouth and the damned witch in his heart, had never been a patient person. After another second, the masseuse's heavily made-up face suddenly had a strange expression. The corners of her lips curled into a faint smile. Then, it distorted, dislocated, and cracked. The beautiful dealer on the other side happened to see this scene. She wanted to scream, but she could only let air fill her throat. Her entire body convulsed. The moment before her entire face shattered, a voice finally came out. I'm the chief editor. Alright. It's like adding wings to a tiger. The blood demon quickly came to a consensus with this person. As for whether this person was purely competing with Mora or had a deeper plan in mind, he did not have the time to care about what kind of trouble this overly luxurious editing department would cause in the future. The conversation ended, and the masseuse ended her mission. The result of being dominated by supernatural powers was that his entire face and even the skin, flesh, and bones above his chest were abruptly torn apart. He was like a rotten watermelon that had been slashed by the wind saber technique. His body fluids gushed out, and he fell on the table. The beautiful dealer's scream finally broke through her throat. She staggered backward, but her 12-centimeter high heels could not support her trembling body. She fell to the ground on her, but after taking 2 steps, her scream was also dispelled. She could only use her hands and feet to retreat with all her might. She wanted to widen the distance between her and this terrifying scene and the terrifying person. The blood demon did not even bother to bat an eyelid. He only extended his hand and wiped his bare chest. As expected, there was some blood on it. He sighed, licked his lips, and tasted it. It's sour. He spat out a mouthful of saliva, extended his leg, and kicked the unconscious former chief editor who was splashed with blood. Hey, wake up. My chief editor's office is going to be changed into the president's office. It's urgent. When this moaning person came back to his senses, the blood demon turned around and looked at the messy gambling table. Alright, the number of people who hate you doesn't increase, and the business isn't losing money or earning money. I'll just treat it as having some fun. Mora, who was far away, probably could not hear him. The blood demon was just saying it casually. He sighed again and turned to look at the beautiful dealer who had already broken down. He put on a very honest smile. Don't be afraid. I'm not as serious as Mora. I don't mind meat or vegetables. Since it's already like this, why don't we just let loose and have some fun? The heart-wrenching screams were destined to be unable to go beyond the walls of the villa. However, the spirit waves released by extremely terrified and despairing people were sharper than any sound waves to sensitive spirit mediums. On the street, Mo La, who had his hands in his pockets and was walking leisurely, pursed his lips at that moment. His gaze was cast toward the sky, looking at the gloomy clouds. He was also trying to capture the dark region that vaguely existed at a deeper level, as well as the buzzing noises that seemed like an illusion. Chapter 989. Luo Nan had never been out to sea in his entire life. This was an obvious lie, but it was his first time riding a boat into the sea in the manner of a normal person. He had personally experienced the scene of fighting against the raging waves and stormy waves. Yes, he didn't enjoy the leisurely nighttime fishing life that Zhang Yingying had announced. Instead, he encountered the sudden gale and giant waves of the southern Pacific Ocean. Perhaps it was because it wasn't completely night yet? In the boundless sea, the stability of a boat's hull was proportional to its volume when encountering wind and waves. If it was a luxurious giant ship like the Jade Light, the normal level 7 or 8 winds and 7 or 8 meter waves would be easily crushed through. But right now, Luo Nan was riding a semi-leisure yacht. Even though it was a large one. This expensive toy appeared slender. Its body length was nearly 100 meters, and the deck height was no more than 15 meters. It undulated between the waves, as if it wanted to drill directly into the sea. Even though it was a yacht, there was no comfort to speak of under such weather and sea conditions. If safety ropes weren't fastened, one would have to play human bowling in the cabin. Especially since it was sailing at a speed of 40 knots under the gale and giant waves. It was simply flying from one wave to another, maintaining a fragile balance amidst the intense turbulence. Luo Nan just happened to be at the bow of the boat, at the forefront of the wrestling between the hull and the giant waves. His arms were propped up on the deck railing. He was like a tourist enjoying the seascape, allowing the tons of seawater to sweep over him. This scene was a bit artificial, but he was just a body of water vapor here. It wouldn't be a problem for him to completely scatter the water. In comparison, Zhang Yingying was the real iron-headed doll. She settled down the incubator of her own son, making sure that it wouldn't be damaged by the ups and downs. Then she impatiently rushed to the bow of the boat, letting the seawater drench her body. She laughed loudly as she staggered, enjoying the thrill of madness to her heart's content. Due to the suppression of the roaring sea wind and giant waves, all of her words had to be shouted. It feels great. Boss personally steers the helm. It feels great. Luo Nan had to admit that Her Majesty Empress Wu really knew how to give people pleasant surprises. She said to leave by sea, and it was arranged. Moreover, he had condescended to personally take charge of a recreational yacht. He really didn't look like his usual quiet and serene self. Luo Nan began to believe it. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu really was an explorer. There was a crazy factor in her bones. However, what are you doing here? Tons of seawater swept onto the deck, and apart from the shocking impact, there was also a low and hoarse sound, which made people wonder if the strength of the structure was really suitable for the current environment. Steel was already like this, let alone humans. Luo Nan was a bit worried about Zhang Yingying's safety. Are you going to be a concubine in the Dragon Palace? You don't understand. To me, this kind of weather is my fate. My white rainbow was enlightened at this kind of time. As he spoke, there was a hissing sound in the atmosphere full of water vapor. An oncoming wave actually split in the middle, forcibly separating. As the saying goes, drawing a knife to cut the water. Luo Nan laughed dryly and clapped to liven things up for Miss Zhang. However, this was the first time Luo Nan had heard of the details of Zhang Yingying's ability awakening. It was a bit of a legend, but it was very reasonable. After all, no one was an innate ability user. Her ability awakened under extreme circumstances, and the unique aura of White Rainbow was very much in line with the logic of human thought. No wonder you always go to the seaside when you're cultivating behind closed doors in Xia City. Yeah. The feeling I get from diving in the sea and striking the waves is very wonderful. I need to get excited at times like this. Luo Nan continued to laugh dryly and continued to clap weakly. Zhang Yingying narrowed her eyes. Speaking of which, something's on your mind. I'm not. Hee hee, then who are you showing that stinky face to? You can't even hide it from silly sand. I can confirm that it's currently insensitive to human emotions. I'm going to chop you up again. Believe it or not. The experiment won't go smoothly. That can't be right. I see that you can't wait to end the experiment. Everyone is stupefied by you. It's like they stole a chicken. Is it that obvious? Luo Nan reflected on his own expression, but he soon gave up. He just answered frankly, the experiment went very smoothly. I just thought of some things. It was like a dream. Stop. You don't need to look at me like this. This matter is very private. I'll think about it myself. Luo Nan looked at Zhang Yingying's starry eyes that instantly glowed with curiosity. Zhang Yingying curled her lips. Then go and think about it blindly. Luo Nan laughed as well. He suddenly sighed halfway through his laughter. There are some things that can't be pondered over. Luo Nan's mood became a bit gloomy when he spoke to this point. It was just as he said. There were some things that couldn't be pondered over. Even if it was a dream that came from nothingness, it would be pierced and dissected by all sorts of psychological analysis until it was drenched in blood. What's more, it was such a realistic scene. That's right. Luo Nan was pondering over matters related to the dream right now. On Zeolite Beach, the melody of the Crimson Will was engraved in his heart. It lingered in the air of reality for the first time. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now that he thought about it, it was an attack comparable to sin poison tearing apart the dimensional wall. It wasn't that direct, but it leaked out unwittingly. By the time Luo Nan realized it, deep imprints had already been carved into the planes of emotion and reason. How could he view it as a dream? Well, Luo Nan didn't view a dream as a dream in the past. But due to the sense of distance between the dream and reality, he instinctively avoided the logical chain of reality that would bring the two closer together. He didn't go and ponder deeply over the magnificent interstellar era of the distant light concealment galaxy. He didn't know why the heavenly Yuan Empire, which was struggling in desperate straits, would form such a peculiar connection with Earth, which currently hung alone in the universe. But the reality was that Luo Nan had come into contact with things related to supernatural powers on Earth. Often, he would be able to link together with the other side after a few twists and turns. The others were fine. The most typical example was the burner, Deep Blue Walker system. The dynamo core that was necessary for the burner transformation. The formatted space and the bloodshed field. Of course, there was also the Deep Blue platform. Especially this one. The fourth division would explode. The so-called fourth division was the abbreviation for the fourth equipment division of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. It was the research and manufacturing center of the Empire's lightweight armor. Luo Nan couldn't avoid this when it came to diagnosing and repairing warframes in the relay station scene. His ears were hurting from listening to it. Why would the fourth division explode? It was a crude imitation of the Deep Blue platform. Perhaps some new things had been mixed in, but Luo Nan, who had received training as a maintenance soldier in the interruption station, could see through its most basic design ideas with a single glance. The later matured versions were fine. At the very least, they made some adaptable adjustments according to the specific level of Earth's material processing capabilities. But the ones from before, especially the experimental machine that Luo Nan used on Zeolite Beach, were completely copied from the path of the four classic molds. The original classic design appeared full of flaws due to the lack of energy, materials, artificial intelligence, and the jade crystal array. These weren't the main points. The deep information hidden behind these superficial phenomena was what Luo Nan couldn't help but ponder and guess at, the Deep Blue Walker and its transplant. Were they related to the Heavenly Yuan Empire? How did that transplant come to Earth from some unknown place in the Hangguang Galaxy? What position did he hold in the end? Was this fellow Li Wei, who was currently nowhere to be seen? Of course, it was possible that there wasn't such a person. It was just like Luo Nan's external core or Jean Tong's divine binding hoop. Did they come from the ruins of a floating civilization? It was just like the labyrinth behind the cloud world, the abyss sun wheel in the depths of the hazy and boundless spacetime fragments, and the tattered spaceship at its edge. Who was the owner of the spaceship? Was it Liang Lu? Luo Nan couldn't help but guess due to the high degree of correlation between the external neuron and the other side. Of course, it was just a guess. The problem was that there was a continuous stream of evidence the moment such a thought arose. It was like a roaring storm pouncing over. It wasn't just the stacking interference technology thesis in the external neurons database. After all, the thesis in the database could come from any channel. Even Zhang He's thesis was preserved there. But let's not talk about the thesis. Let's talk about the real thing. The invisible muslin, which was highly compatible with the thesis, was inevitably scarce no matter what era or civilization it was. It was an advanced artifact that Liang Lu had already confirmed to be extremely difficult to replicate. Why did it also fall to Earth, and why was it torn into two halves? Why did the first scene of the Inner Universe simulator cut into the relay station, which was highly related to Liang Lu? Luo Nan couldn't help but think. What happened to Liang Lu and those people at the relay station in the end? Was that scene a simulated plot, or was it an event that truly happened? Were those people simulated data, or did they truly exist? At the very least, were they projections that once existed? If it really was a reproduction of a certain true scene, then even if Luo Nan could imagine a happy ending for the battle situation at the relay station, what happened afterwards? Even if Luo Nan excluded the idea that Liang Lu had drifted to Earth in the end, which was too much of a coincidence, it was hard for Luo Nan to imagine that Liang Lu's stacking interference technology was Liang Lu's invention. It was the environment that the heavenly Yuan Empire should have. Aside from the vigilance and caution of the mental plane, Luo Nan had never experienced the harsh and callous pressure of a so-called god in the relay station. Did the Hongguang Galaxy's assault on the Crimson Will Rift fail in the end? The thousands of years of effort of the Heavenly Abyss clan were ultimately annihilated in a puff of smoke? Did the current Hongguang Galaxy degenerate into a vicious hell? Or did it become a paradise for fantasy types or outer realm types? Or was it under the rule of some interstellar civilization? Was it the Star Alliance? Was it the Kingdom of Gods? Or was it something else? What sort of fate did those people and those faces within the relay station of Outpost 4 have? Luo Nan wanted to know. He wanted to know no matter what. Chapter 990. Whether it was because of illusory emotions or because of intrinsic curiosity, Luo Nan had a drive to seek answers. And as his thoughts continued to penetrate deeper and deeper, this driving force continued to accelerate and expand. Luo Nan had tried to seek answers from the Inner Universe simulator, but it was to no avail. Instead, the more he dug, the greater the expanse of emptiness appeared before his eyes. There was no way to fill in the blanks. There were all sorts of details that revealed vague trends. Just thinking about it made his heart clench into a ball. For the time being, Luo Nan didn't know what he should do or what he could do. Perhaps he would overexert himself and turn into an idiot who chased after an illusory dreamland. However, Luo Nan also believed that as long as he followed his current rhythm on this path without stopping for even a moment, there would be a day sooner or later. Perhaps in the near future, he would touch the edge of that illusory dreamland. He would touch the traces left behind in reality. Whether it was the current Deep Blue Walker or the phantom hidden behind Deep Blue's Apocalypse Laboratory, perhaps there were other things hidden even deeper. Luo Nan possessed a high degree of sensitivity towards these things. He just needed to wait for an opportunity to make contact. In fact, just like the theory of superconfiguration described, as long as one's existence increased, under the effects of superconnection and superinterference, on the fantasy level, the external environment and even the entire world would be distorted into what one wanted. Alright, he was thinking a bit too much. Right now, no matter how much Luo Nan thought about it, it was impossible for him to make the truth of the universe rotate according to his will. At most, he could make the wind and waves that assaulted his face a bit larger. Zhang Yingying really knew how to give people space. She didn't pester Luo Nan to get to the bottom of things. She just let Luo Nan think blindly. She just stayed by his side and enjoyed the blessing of her life's giant waves. She chopped 17 or 18 times in a row. Some waves were successfully chopped, while others were not strong enough. She was drenched from head to toe. She only stopped when she saw Luo Nan's attention return to reality. Today's waves are a bit big. Boss said that it's not just because of the weather. Yeah, this. Luo Nan calmed his mind and was just about to continue chatting with Zhang Yingying when another person walked up to the front deck against the wind and waves. The person spoke in a deep voice, "Sir, the mutants in the sea are a bit restless. Their emotions are quite obvious." It was Meng Chong. Compared to Zhang Yingying, who was swaying left and right, this person was much more stable. There was a layer of dim red light on his body, like a flame that was about to be extinguished. It seemed like it could be destroyed by the wind and waves at any time, but it could always be maintained and never extinguished. This was the residual effect of being a chess piece on the zeolite beach. There were still some problems with the chi activity of the mushed-mouth ape. After leaving, he could not quickly resolve the extreme power impact of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss area. He needed a long time to adjust and adapt. From his perspective, slowly cultivating was one way. But if he followed Luo Nan, he would be able to make adjustments in a timely manner. His efficiency would be higher. Therefore, he used the excuse of running errands for his mister to directly follow Luo Nan onto the ship. Luo Nan didn't care, and Her Majesty Empress Wu, the master of the house, didn't refuse. Compared to Zhang Yingying, Meng Chong was more experienced. He did not talk much, but he always hit the nail on the head. This could be the precursor to the formation of a small, tide rush, and we just happened to be there. But it could also be a simple chain reaction caused by a certain species. Regardless of the year or month, the ocean had never been safe. After the era of distortion, it became even more severe. The beginnings of distortion came from the ocean. This was basically a public opinion. This had always been the most active domain of the mutant species. Powerful aberrations could be found everywhere. Some traveled around the world with ocean currents, searching for food all over the globe. Some formed gigantic undersea nests and dominated an area. Occasionally, there would even be traces of extraordinary-level creatures. Actually, Luo Nan didn't need Zhang Yingying and Meng Chong to remind him. He knew that there were many wild, chaotic, and irascible auras surrounding their flying yacht on the surface of the ocean. They followed their powerful instincts, moving stealthily beneath the roaring and surging waves, waiting for an opportunity to move. Some began to follow the yacht not long after it set out to sea. As the winds and waves gradually rose, not only did the number not decrease, but it rapidly increased. Luo Nan liked this a lot. Yes, that's right. He liked it a lot. This was because these violent yet powerful life forms followed and gathered above the violent winds and huge waves. Within the boundless black clouds, the clamorous noise that was suppressed by the terrible weather environment grew clearer and clearer. On a plane that other people were unable to sense, millions upon millions of control lines were dropping down from the cloud layer. Their target was no longer just the semi-dormant dumb sand. Instead, they were directly cast into the ocean. They churned within the seawater and stuck together with the violent mutant life forms. The millions upon millions of lines would occasionally collapse, occasionally increase and decrease. They were unstable. And every change occurred in units of tens of thousands, and the frequency of changes had already been compressed to the millisecond level. It was impossible for anyone's brain to fully monitor and calculate such a complex and chaotic situation. Not even Luo Nan could do it, but he had the massive cloud organism brain array, incomplete, to help with the processing. All sorts of structural data could be stored remotely into the external neuron and then retrieved and analyzed. Wasn't this the purpose of the built-in simulator function? Even though the inner-verse simulator had been affected by the overload simulation last time and was currently in the repair phase, its basic analysis and calculation functions were still reliable. Why didn't Luo Nan take the more efficient airship? Why did he strongly request to come to the ocean? It was absolutely not for the sake of leisurely night fishing, nor was it because he wanted to pull up a few groundless big fish. In the end, it was just this one reason. Luo Nan's initial experiment on Zeolite Beach had ended, but his true experiment had just begun. How was this even possible? This is just a small problem. Zhang Yingying confirmed that Luo Nan's mood was only temporarily depressed. She no longer cared about what thoughts were swirling in his mind. From her perspective, this was the time to properly enjoy the unique experience of the ocean. As for the so-called mutant population that followed the yacht, Her Majesty Empress Wu was on the ship to suppress it. There were also Luo Nan, Meng Chong, and other strong people. What was there to be afraid of? Come. Let's take a picture. Zhang Yingying used the floating camera that had played an important role not too long ago to take a picture of herself and Luo Nan. Yes, she also gave half of Meng Chong's face. Then she sent it to the group. Thinking about it wasn't enough, so she posted it on social media as well. She labeled it as Tide Maker. The effects of Luo Nan's live broadcast class were still in the ascendant. The shockwaves were still spreading through all kinds of media. It couldn't be said to have swept the entire world, but it was rapidly permeating through various domains related to the inner world. As one of the most important live streamers, Zhang Yingying's account update just happened to catch up to the crest of the wave. It immediately caused a large amount of reposts, and a group of people lamented in the comments section, why did it suddenly end? The warm-up took so long, and the climax was so short. You need to be careful at such a young age. Come in with a stupefied expression. Leave with a stupefied expression. My writing on the blackboard. Who has class notes I can borrow to copy? This damned capitalistic society. I've been charged for all the shared resources I've found. Zhang Yingying didn't care about this. She couldn't care. Right now, she was already in full swing chatting with the people in the group. She would send a photo of Luo Nan at the bow of the yacht from time to time. It could be considered a benefit for her friends. However, the fellows in the group were all greedy. What are you posting pictures for? Start a live broadcast. Ask teacher Luo to give a small lesson. Don't use cavalry. Get infantry. There's nothing to see right now. He's still grieving over the changing seasons. When all was said and done, it was nothing more than a puff of water vapor. This was truly like a dream, an illusion, a bubble. How hateful. This was such a good opportunity. She couldn't even see if there was any material. Zhang Yingying muttered in her mind, but in the end, she complied with the will of the people. She displayed the function of the floating camera to its peak, giving Luo Nan a relatively stable shot amidst the violent storm. The signal transmission over the sea was just like that. Even though the psychic wave network did some optimization after receiving the signal, it could only barely be said to not lag. Meng Chong consciously retreated backwards, avoiding the area covered by the camera. He continued to stand steadily beneath the wind and waves, acting as a bodyguard. This could be considered his job. Come. Say hello to everyone. Sing a song or something. Perhaps it was just as Zhang Yingying said. Violent winds and giant waves were her life. She really was a bit high. A few hours ago, Luo Nan had whistled for no more than a few dozen seconds in total, but it had left him extremely amazed. He really wanted to try and see if he could squeeze out more from Luo Nan. Luo Nan still remembered a few fragments of the melody, but there was no need to, right? He just pretended not to hear and greeted everyone in the group. Then he skillfully changed the topic. I almost forgot to ask you. You were talking about the diamond on the beach. What in the world does it mean? Zhang Yingying curled her lips. I shouldn't have had such hopes for you. What's the two of diamonds? Luo Nan had just snuck him out. Papercut had become a negative example in front of all the ability users in the world. Only now did he tidy up his mood and go online. He thought that a new lesson had come out, so he asked in a hurry. Let's play cards. Zhang Yingying responded in a bad mood. I'll give you the two of diamonds. Do you want it? Go, Ghost Manager. Papercut was a veteran operator of a handicraft store. Whether it was playing cards or selling cards, he was considered a professional. Sure enough, your courage explodes when your name resounds. Bamboo Pole already understood what Zhang Yingying was talking about. He chuckled and sent a beautiful photo. The photo was a snapshot. Only the side profile of the target was captured. Through the gaps between the swaying strands of hair, Bamboo Pole was able to capture the outline of the woman's side profile, which was even more profound under the thick makeup. He could also see the sharp gaze that instantly stared into the camera. You even dare to manage this person? Speaking of which, the person who took this photo must have grass growing 3 feet above their graves, right? Sister Cat Eyes? Shui Lei interrupted. Godly cat eyes. No wonder you haven't been able to find a new home after being dumped last time. Gosh, I misread. Sorry. Shui Lei hurriedly apologized. Straight men mostly relied on their makeup to recognize people. In the circle, only Cat Eyes, who often hung out in nightclubs, would wear this sort of attire. There was no response from Cat Eyes. Holy crap. You guys are talking about the 2 of diamonds. Papercut finally came to a realization. He sent a thumbs down emoji. You guys are in the South Pacific. Then I'll wish you guys a happy reunion with the King of Diamonds. Chapter 991. K of Diamonds? Zhang Yingying didn't care. Hee, boss is here. Boss Luo can also make up the numbers. What am I afraid of? F***ck, Brother Papercut is so ruthless. It seems that you were almost sliced into pieces by the Shangding building this morning. But I'm really drooling over Mola's type. It can be used to attack or defend, and it can also be used to attack or be useless. It's definitely a versatile style. Similarly, the active octopus also came online. When it came to the gossip of the extraordinaries, the atmosphere in the group heated up. Speaking of which, Her Majesty Empress Wu hasn't entered the deck yet. This edition should be in, and there have been a lot of changes in the past few years. Jin Buhuan, Jin Tong, Gong Qi. F***ck, I just found out that 2/3 of the people who need to change cards are related to Luo Yuan. Boss Luo should also be in the deck. I think 2 of diamonds is quite suitable. Boss Luo has always kept a low profile. He might not authorize the magazine. The sudden interruption caused a row of vomiting emojis to fill the screen instantly. Do you really think I don't read the group chat? Luo Nan swiped through quite a few pages and discovered that he recognized every single word on the page. But when they were put together, it was like reading a heavenly book. He finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Don't just care about killing and burying. Can you give me an explanation? Nowadays, intellectual property rights are all charged. Zhang Yingying took the initiative to retort. The quality of today's live stream is so good. It's so tiring to watch. It's not easy to memorize the words on the blackboard, and it takes a lot of electricity to record, okay? If it wasn't for Yingying's parent-child program, I would have gone back to sleep. Some people's explanations are too inhuman. In the end, they only care about their own experiments and don't explain anything. It's really embarrassing for us researchers. The octopus was also full of complaints. I was almost dragged to the Shangding building to be dissected. In the end, I was laughed at by that brat He Donglu the entire way. Have you ever considered my feelings? Papercut was truly resentful. It was rare for him to be proud and pampered. After looking around, we know that our physical bodies have no human rights. As your senior brother, I don't have the face to tell my master. Shui Lei joined in the fun. Hee. Red Fox was the simplest. There were also a few people who didn't speak, but they also entered the spectator mode. Luo Nan blinked. Then we'll arrange for small classes. It's free. I don't even want honor points. Don't be like this. Honor points are definitely needed. It would be better to give everyone a share later. Zhang Yingying made the decision on Luo Nan's behalf. Luo Nan was very surprised. Could it be that in your eyes, I don't know how to surf the internet? With so much free time, I'm about to find out who started Card Deck magazine. There was an awkward silence in the group for a second. Octopus quickly answered, I know. Deck magazine is controlled by the Mystical Information Society. It's a semi-official media organization authorized by the Star Alliance Committee. It said that the big shot behind them is Bai Hao. You know Bai Hao, right? He's a veteran extraordinaire. He lives in STEM City and works in the world government. He's the highest representative who connects with the inner world all year round. When you guys arrived at D City, didn't you pay your respects to the mountain head? That's old news. After Bai Hao retired 2 years ago, he didn't seem to care much about things on the surface. That's why the Deck magazine has always wanted to launch a supplementary deck, but it's difficult to produce it. Out of the 80 to 90 extraordinaries, only 52 of them were recorded. They even keep talking about the authorization. In fact, it's hard to say if there will be a next issue. I say, don't you guys read the economic news? Bamboo Pole was very astonished at the knowledge and information sensitivity of the human evolved elites in the group. Yesterday morning, the Mystical Information Society already made an announcement. Deck magazine has already changed hands, okay? The person who took over is also super high profile. What? Changed hands? Bai Hao is holding the line in the back. Who would dare to take over if they aren't extraordinaries? Wouldn't they be worried that there'll be another shocking gossip like, for the sake of the ghost card, Rabbi the Clown fights a secret battle with a High Lord? Ah, no, a natural disaster. Fuck, blood demon. Isn't this guy messing around? Following the transfer of the news link, the topics in the group once again deviated towards an unbearably chaotic state. However, Luo Nan, who was relying on himself to look up information, was already barely able to keep up with everyone's rhythm. At the very least, he already had a relatively clear understanding of what Zhang Yingying meant when she said, square. Simply speaking, the recently chaotic Deck magazine, which had a powerful background in the past, specifically targeted extraordinaries. It made a rather public, BA, ranking in the form of playing cards. They made it seem like they were wanted criminals. The above was Luo Nan's ridicule. The Deck magazine's ranking logic was as follows: there were 54 cards in a deck. The big and small ghost cards weren't used. They were left empty to show that the most powerful were undecided. The remaining 52 cards were divided into 4 suits. Each suit represented a type of extraordinary powerhouse. Among them, spades represented powerful and balanced. They believed that this type of extraordinaries didn't have any obvious weaknesses. They were strong enough to ignore weaknesses. They were considered the most powerful type. Hearts represented the pinnacle of flesh and blood. They chose people with powerful fleshly bodies. Plum represented the profundity of the spirit. They chose extraordinaries of the spirit side. Diamonds represented extremely troublesome. They chose the world's most famous troublemakers. They were extraordinary class ticking time bombs. There were also some small rules within this. For example, the 4 aces were just enough for the 4 leaders of the 3 great orders to divide them up. There was no need for further classification and ranking. The 4 number 2 cards were chosen from new extraordinaries. They showed that their potential was limitless. They could be the smallest cards, but they could also be the biggest cards aside from the ghost cards. They showed the rules of a generation, the will of a generation of gods. Also, it was generally believed that the 4 suits of J, Q, K, and A represented the strongest 16 people in the world, including mutants. This was because there was a mutant that was an exception. It was Poseidon, who was active in various regions of the world's oceans. He was the most powerful mutant in legend. He occupied the King of Diamonds. This was the blessing sent by Papercut. The Ace of Diamonds was true god Qian-ju of the Amaterasu order. Not to mention whether or not this was a coincidence, this position was very much in line with Luo Nan's heart. The focus of the discussion in the group right now was, the Blood Demon, who was especially active on the internet and loved to cause trouble, had suddenly taken down this extremely controversial media magazine. He was definitely up to something. The key was what he was up to, and how he was going to do it. It didn't take long for the latest Deck magazine to be released. Powerful people like Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just become extraordinaries in the second half of last year, would definitely be on the list as long as she didn't explicitly oppose it. Then would the most eye-catching Luo Yuan be on the list as well? What suit and what position would they be in? Boss will definitely be in the spades group. But if he doesn't lose, he'll be in 2 of spades. Zhang Yingying was naturally filled with confidence. Bamboo Pole thought a bit more. You can say that there's no problem, but the spades group is full of people right now. They're all veteran powerhouses. Every one of them is unbelievably stable. I feel like we'll offend them no matter who we replace. You can't just ask President Ouyang to abdicate, right? Fuck. Maybe that blood demon fellow will dare to make the decision for someone else. He can't wait to see Xia City in chaos and have some fun for him to see. What about Boss Luo? And that Mr. Mo from Bansheng? So insincere. Isn't it boring? I'm talking about what suit? You won't admit it even if I tell you to feign ignorance. It's definitely 2 of diamonds arrangement. My Miss Mola has been keeping a low profile lately. She's been cultivating her mind and character. She can totally be assigned to Plum Blossom. Bamboo Pole suddenly asked a question, then how many cards do you think the sincere and smart Mr. Blood Demon will arrange for Boss Luo? The more Luo Nan understood the world, the more he felt that the twists and turns inside were far too complicated. Luo Nan gradually broke away from the chatting atmosphere of the group. He wasn't bored. He was just watching from the side. It was quite good. It was impossible for him to completely focus on chatting with others. The experiment at hand was always in progress. There was also the ever-increasing number of mutants following the yacht. They kept on expanding without end. In the end, they were still playing with fire. Meng Chong maintained a high level of vigilance from beginning to end. He paid attention to the roaring waves and the indistinct shadows of fierce figures. The mutants were all carnivores. In the surging and ceaseless biological chain of the ocean, everything was carried out in motion. Eating, resting, and even reproducing didn't conflict with temporarily following the yacht. If they were in the mood and were sick of eating meat, it wasn't impossible for them to flip this large toy on the surface of the ocean and pick and choose to eat some snacks. Moreover, there were too many tyrannical creatures gathered in a relatively small area. This in itself was harmful to their mental state. It was normal for their mood to continue to be irritable. Boss Luo, you're distracted again. What are you looking at? Luo Nan had forgotten that he was the focus of everyone's attention right now. This was especially true when he was still in video chat mode. A slight deviation of his attention would be exposed to everyone's eyes. There's a beauty next to him. Yingying is giving out a lot of benefits right now. Boss, you're hurting people's feelings like this. Bamboo Pole was always the type to talk about things like this. Get lost. Zhang Yingying turned the camera away in annoyance. She didn't let her overly cool outfit appear in front of others, but she didn't forget the current situation the yacht was facing. She followed Luo Nan's line of sight and turned the camera to the roaring and undulating sea. Right now, the density of marine life surrounding the yacht was so dense that even the gale and waves couldn't hide it. They could casually see scales, sharp fins, and other things that were completely different from the color of the sea. They came and went between the waves and bubbles. There were even streams of blood that were wrapped in the wind and waves as they slapped against the yacht. Fuck. Octopus subconsciously swiped a stupefied dog emoji. The honest guy is furious. Brother Papercut, your curse has come true. Should I take it back? Papercut really did take it a bit seriously. Zhang Yingying's choice of camera had a very strong visual impact. It felt like the lead gray waves of the ocean were a dense mass. It was hard to tell whether the waves were crashing against the yacht, or these sinister marine life forms were carrying the yacht and flying on the surface of the sea. It wasn't just them. Zhang Yingying, who had already been mentally prepared, was shocked. How long has it been? How come there are so many now? Chapter 992. This doesn't seem like tide rush. It's too purposeful. It seems like there really is something attracting them, triggering their greed and restless emotions. Though Meng Chong had a physical body, the Blood Flame Order was a professional among professionals when it came to sensing and utilizing the extreme emotions of living creatures. Their words held great authority. Of course, in Meng Chong's mind, the greatest authority was right by his side. His gaze naturally turned to Luo Nan. Zhang Yingying saw this and suddenly came to a realization. Luo Nan, what the hell are you doing now? Luo Nan spread his hands. He didn't say anything, but he suddenly tilted his head. Do you guys hear something? Don't change the subject. Do you have ears? Oh, I was wrong. It's an oscillating psychic wave. It seems to be a cry for help. A cry for help? Who? Is there a ship in distress nearby? Zhang Yingying really did communicate with the cockpit as she spoke. She turned around and spread her hands at Luo Nan. I already said it's a psychic wave. It's not an electric wave. How far can a psychic wave travel? Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. Zhang Yingying had no way of refuting a master of mental senses who had redefined the structure of the mental domain. She didn't want to pester endlessly, so she could only discuss the matter as it stood. Which location? There are only so many people in the inner world. Maybe they know each other. I'll help them if I can. Luo Nan pointed at the deck. A ship? An ocean yacht murder case? The guys in the group never expected something like this to happen. Their excitement rose to their heads, and their imaginations couldn't be shut. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but roll her eyes. Hey, in order to go out to sea with Yuan Luo, we set out in light gear. There are only a few people on the yacht. Other than the front deck, they're in the cockpit. When we get back, we even have to fish and cook dinner on the spot. Murder. Murder my ass. Bamboo pole was more reliable. You mean under the ship, in the ocean? Cat Eyes, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, maybe they're already in the belly of a big fish. Needless to say, it wasn't impossible. Not to mention the undulating sea surface that had a height difference of over 10 meters, even if the surrounding sea was densely packed with marine life, only 10 to 20% of them were mutants. It would be a fatal danger if one were to fall inside. Zhang Yingying knew her own limits. Just by looking at the situation, she knew that if she fell down, she could only scream for help. She saw that Luo Nan's mind was a bit erratic. Perhaps he was still trying to capture the exact source of the psychic wave, but she was not surprised. She turned her gaze to look at Meng Chong. Lao Meng. Zhang Yingying's deliberate closeness wasn't the main point. The main point was her intimate relationship with Luo Nan. So, Meng Chong bowed slightly and was very polite. The qi dynamic in the sea is chaotic, and extreme emotions are mixed together. I can't control the details better than you, so I really didn't sense it. However, if there really was such a spiritual wave, being able to keep up with the high-speed cruise ship and transmit it in such a noisy environment, it must have a certain level of strength and should also have an outstanding disguise method. If that's the case, I could have just taken advantage of the chaos to escape. Yet, I ended up in a situation where I had to ask for help. It's either that I ran out of energy and couldn't maintain my disguise for a long time, or that I've been locked onto by someone stronger. If it's the former, the other party should do their best to approach the yacht and attract our attention. If it's the latter, I can basically confirm that this is a conflict on the B rank level. There are a few B rank mutants in the surroundings, but there aren't many. There are even fewer areas of conflict. Meng Chong's way of thinking was quite rigorous, but there were still a few B rank mutants. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes again. But in this large ecosystem of the sea, Meng Chong's description was completely correct. This was especially true around T-City, the most important hunting ground for marine mutants in the world. So, was there a conclusion? Zhang Yingying looked at Luo Nan once more, but Luo Nan still didn't speak. Not only that, but his gaze was oddly cast towards the sky. It really was confusing. On the contrary, Meng Chong hesitated for a few seconds before his gaze turned to a certain location on the starboard side of the front deck. Zhang Yingying was very quick-witted. Her gaze and the camera followed at the same time. She showed great mercy and gave her friends in Xia City a live broadcast. The timing was just right. Only a second or two passed before a dark green shadow suddenly appeared on the side of the ship. It leaped out at a speed far exceeding that of most marine life forms. Under the dusky sky and sea, its body seemed to have been smeared with a layer of fluorescent substance. It was extremely conspicuous. However, everyone could more or less see that this was a natural radiation phenomenon when its spiritual power was fully unleashed. It clearly couldn't hide any longer and fled with all its might. What was that? The fluorescent light reflected a silhouette. It was malevolent and ugly to the point of stupefaction. It was like an extremely large spider covered in muscles. It stuck close to the surface of the sea and floated past with a whooshing sound. A water spider? Speaking of which, I saw a bull's head. Was it an illusion? With the current transmission speed of the satellite network, a relatively smooth image could still be seen. But once it entered the high-speed range, it would be so blurry that even one's own mother wouldn't be able to recognize it. Before the group of people in the group could struggle out of the low-quality image, a long gray shadow leaped out. The surging water around its body was like a high-speed water blade. It hummed and hissed, beheading countless shoals of fish in its path. A few muffled sounds of metal rubbing against metal could be heard in the middle. Ah, my boat! Zhang Yingying's cry of surprise was only a foil. Most people's attention was still on the chase. The muscular spider in front looked huge, but its lightness was incredible. It moved on the undulating waves of the sea as if it was walking on flat ground. It was extremely agile, as if it could fly at any time. As for the one chasing behind, it looked like a conger eel or a sea snake. It looked fierce and violent, like a long spear or a giant axe. With a single movement, it could cut apart all living things in its path. It had an extremely strong explosive power and was definitely faster than the former. It was just that its agility was slightly inferior, which was why the muscular spider in front of it had repeatedly escaped. Perhaps that was why the muscular spider did not dare to go too far. It used the yacht as cover and circled on the surface of the sea. It really is a B-class. Zhang Yingying was a little jealous. Generally speaking, the B-class spiritual side was easier to distinguish. It was based on whether one's consciousness could penetrate into the abyss and interfere with it. The standard for physical side was a little more vague, but turning nothingness into reality was definitely a hard bar. To be able to borrow power from relatively insubstantial objects such as seawater and the atmosphere, even with the addition of the racial ability, it was not too far off. After watching for a long time, everyone had absorbed enough images and began to distinguish some things. F***CK, a battleship slicing blade. Which one? The one behind. Obviously. Bamboo Pole was still at the level of an intelligence expert. In a few seconds, he had sent the information and relevant images to the group. Be careful, this kind of mutated blade eel is also a stubborn child. Its entire body is harder than gold and iron. Cutting the hull of a ship at high speed and causing a shipwreck is a common occurrence. Moreover, it is used to non-hunting killing, so there is no reason for it to slash people. If you could send this 10 seconds earlier, I would be very grateful to you. Zhang Yingying blew hard on her forehead to dispel the annoyance in her heart. The problem was that the hair in front of her forehead was already wet and could not be blown up. It was even more annoying to have it lying on her forehead. The starboard hull is damaged. There is no leakage right now, but it will be hard to say in a few minutes. Also, what is that deformed thing in front of us? Right now, everyone knew that it was not a spider and that the bull head was not an illusion. That fellow really did grow half a bull's body. Its muscles were knotted, and its head had a short horn, a long face, a thick nose, and a large mouth. It was indeed an enormous bull head. However, the area where the bull body and the spider body were connected swelled and deformed. It began to rapidly transform into the image of a spider, and the dark green fluorescence it emitted came from this area. 8 hairy claws extended out from the area where the body was connected. The tips of the claws were faintly discernible, looking extremely tough and sharp. Zhang Yingying frowned as she evaluated. This body structure is a bit like a human-faced arachnid. If that thing had a body, could it be called a cow-faced arachnid? This is a bull demon, the traditional demon form of Ban City. The one who responded to her was actually Luo Nan, who was destined to have no fate with Erudite. Zhang Yingying was truly shocked. How did you know? You've seen it in Ban City. You could say that. Luo Nan had indeed seen a portion of the roughly processed bull demon skeleton before. The processing factory of the Great Zhe Order was most proficient in processing this kind of mutant material. The perfect skeleton that Luo Nan's main body needed to display its greatest combat strength was made from this material. You really are different now that you have experience. It was hard to tell whether Zhang Yingying's words were praise or sarcasm. Oh right. Didn't you just say that someone was crying for help? How come a bull demon popped out in the end? Where's the person? Luo Nan raised his chin and once again stamped the scene of the chase, which had already circled to the rear half of the yacht. Actually, there was no need for confirmation. Many people, including Zhang Yingying, had already reacted. You're joking, right? That muscular spider, bull demon. Yeah, it's the one crying for help. It's been crying for help all this time. It seems to have recognized Her Majesty Empress Wu. You guys sense it carefully, you're getting more and more bizarre the more you talk. Zhang Yingying looked at Meng Chong. Meng Chong smiled wryly and shook his head. The mental domain is too chaotic. I'm not good at this. Luo Nan felt that the situation was very clear. This bull demon is very smart. It has some ability to communicate with people. It discovered that it was being chased and that its chances of escaping were slim. It simply fired psychic waves to tangle with us. Let's hope that Her Majesty Empress Wu can save its life. The chain of logic is quite complete. Zhang Yingying could only give this evaluation. It must be said that the level of intelligence of high-level mutants had always been the focus of research in the wilderness. Ever since the era of mutants, there were hundreds of cases of mutants and humans realizing the communication of consciousness. Be it true or false, these cases occurred every year. Zhang Yingying would not easily refute or deny a person of authority like Luo Nan. She just wanted to figure things out. You're saying that it went looking for the boss, and then you monitored it? Something like that. The boss didn't respond to it? Not at the moment. It should be. Indeed. Zhang Yingying looked at the exhausted appearance of the bull demon. If Her Majesty Empress Wu allowed it, then it wouldn't be like this. The boss didn't respond to it. Could it be that he thinks it's too ugly? He probably doesn't want to get involved in trouble. Zhang Yingying pursed her lips. I feel that letting it go would be a big problem. If we let that battleship slicing blade make a few more rounds, then it'll be our turn to send a distress signal. How far away is T-City? It's the standard way to throw our face into the Pacific Ocean. Luo Nan grunted. That proves that Her Majesty Empress Wu feels that interfering would be a big problem. Chapter 993. Zhang Yingying was startled. What do you mean? Luo Nan's gaze drifted erratically between the sea and the sky. What I mean is that we might have been targeted. At the very least, that ox demon has certainly been targeted by something. Of course, I'm not talking about that battleship slicing blade. It's not the battleship slicing saber. Are you saying that the battleship slicing saber is under someone's control? Yeah, he probably wants to rush to the periphery. Luo Nan responded unhurriedly. Right now his attention only occasionally swept across the scene of the pursuit. The vast majority of his attention was cast towards the gloomy clouds in the sky. Influenced by him, Zhang Yingying also looked up at the sky. Up there? Luo Nan answered honestly, I'm not sure. I just feel like I'm being spied on. Perhaps I can ask Her Majesty Empress Wu for guidance. Wait a minute, you said, maybe. Both you and the boss are not sure. Zhang Yingying blinked her eyes. She finally grasped the main point of Luo Nan's words. Hey! Think about the cage theory. You can't just randomly spout these words. That is the truth. Luo Nan extended his hand and water vapor condensed on his fingertips. It seemed that he wanted to write something, but in the end, he dispersed it. Contact is a violation. It's one-sided. The other party has done it quite brilliantly. Zhang Yingying opened her mouth again, but before she could say anything, several messages had already exploded in the group. Not only did they come at the same time, but the content was also surprisingly consistent. Extraordinary? No way. Zhang Yingying couldn't accept it. According to the explanation of Luo Nan's prison theory, being able to exert unilateral monitoring on the mental plane proved that one possessed a clear advantage in the depth and breadth of mental senses. And who was the one being monitored? Luo Nan, the world-renowned master of mental senses. He was suspected to be an extraordinary. Her Majesty Empress Wu was a genuine extraordinary. To be able to make the two of them feel that it was troublesome and that they couldn't find the source of the problem, they could only look for an opponent at the extraordinary level. Not only was he an extraordinary, but he was also a master of the mental side, which was beyond imagination. It's not that exaggerated. Luo Nan knew that Zhang Yingying and the others were overthinking things. He explained a bit more, the opponent's senses aren't direct. It's just that it's very good at using the medium. The battleship slicing blade was one of the mediums. Many of the surrounding fish and mutants were the same. We still can't figure out where the other party is because a large portion of these living beings have already been tampered with. They are equivalent to preset sensors. In this way, exposing ourselves to these guys is equivalent to exposing ourselves to that person's eyes. These sensors only send out signals. They are everywhere, in the sky and under the sea. It's a mess. The one responsible for the surveillance should have a special frequency receiver that could receive and decode the signals. We can find the transmitter, but we can't find the receiver, that's all. Some of the more technical details didn't need to be discussed. Luo Nan just summarized, in short, we've been tagged. There's a high possibility that it's an extraordinary, but it's a strong enemy. Let's keep watching. Zhang Yingying asked, what's the reason? There's the factor of distance. The psionic wave signal sent out should be very suitable for long-distance transmission, just like radio or infrasonic waves. From the looks of it, the monitor might be very far away. In addition, I feel that if they really have bad intentions towards us, they wouldn't have exposed themselves just because of a cow ghost. If it weren't for the battleship slicing blade receiving a clear command to pursue, it would be very hard for me to detect the fishy nature of these mutants. Unfortunately, the command was very short. It was only for a moment. By the time I reacted, it would be hard for me to pursue them. Zhang Yingying still wanted to get to the bottom of things. In the end, what kind of trick is this? It's similar to a transformation of a prosthetic. It's quite complicated to explain in detail. To put it simply, it's like inserting an antenna. Wouldn't it be more intuitive to say that it's a parasite? The phenomenon of parasites is quite common in the ocean. Zhang Yingying seemed to understand, but she didn't. You're saying that the other side is using some sort of parasite to achieve the purpose of receiving and sending signals. My God, what do you think? Luo Nan shrugged, I'll just observe more. Plus, this is just a preliminary result. I feel like this is the case. I'll have to follow up and observe the specifics. I'll tell you later. No need. No need. Zhang Yingying waved her hand over and over again. It was a bit difficult for the others to sort out clear clues from Luo Nan's words. Comparatively speaking, it was easier for them to open their minds. It can't really be that, right? Papercut began to brood over his own words. He grew more and more unwilling to speak. How could there be such a coincidence? Didn't you just say that Diamond K is mainly active in the South Pacific? Nanster has been heading north ever since he left D-City. The routes have been staggered. The more Octopus put forth his arguments, the more guilty he gave others. Diamond K, Poseidon. Luo Nan had heard of this legendary mutant before. However, he was influenced by ancient myths and unconsciously thought of this fellow as a human. Now that he recalled the relevant information, he was actually unable to recall a more concrete image. He asked Meng Chong, who was beside him, what species did Poseidon mutate from? A whale? There's no specific image. This statement was more or less outside of Luo Nan's expectations, no? Meng Chong nodded slightly, yes. Legend has it that when Poseidon appears, there will always be gales and huge waves in the ocean. Large amounts of marine life are the precursors. He is one with the ocean. He is extremely mysterious. Meng Chong looked at the ocean when he spoke to this point. He was suddenly unable to continue speaking. A series of dull or dark emojis were sent in the group. Zhang Yingying glared at him, "Old Meng, you're doing this on purpose." Meng Chong lowered his eyelids, "That's what the relevant information says." Zhang Yingying choked. She was actually unable to refute. Luo Nan was very curious. No one has ever seen his true appearance. Then how do you know if he's Poseidon or not? If someone wants to kill someone and steal their goods, they can just use a storm to push the blame onto him. Isn't that a bit too easy? The truth is that it's very easy to confuse. It's said that within the small circle of extraordinaries, there are ways to distinguish if someone is Poseidon or not. However, there are also people who are very good at using this method. For example, Nick, the most vicious and evil pirate extraordinaire. It's said that he used Poseidon's name to do many priceless transactions. I think I've heard of this person before, but for an extraordinaire to be a pirate. Zhang Yingying sneered, it's because he did too many shitty things on shore, causing everyone to join forces to hunt him down. He could only hide in the ocean. Don't stray from the topic. Don't stray from the topic. Isn't talking about Poseidon straying from the topic? I really want to run a bit. Meng Chong continued to return to the topic of Poseidon amidst Zhang Yingying's grumbling. Because of Poseidon's mysterious characteristics, a kind of worship has developed in T-City, Tu-City, and other ocean cities. A few small mysterious orders have formed, and they revere him as the will of the ocean. Most of them are fragmented and unsystematic. But even under these circumstances, some rituals are effective, and they are quite consistent. With this evidence, we can basically be certain that there is some sort of extraordinary power, watching the past in the domain of orders. I'm sorry. This is too anthropomorphic. Perhaps it's more objective to call it resonance. Luo Nan keenly grasped the strand of meaning within Meng Chong's words. You're comparing the will of the ocean and the will of the blood flame? Meng Chong hesitated for a moment, but he still said, the personification of faith has never been what we want. Luo Nan nodded, the vast majority of the world doesn't change based on people's desires. However, in a place as small as Earth, I also feel that it's very tasteless to call oneself a god. Everyone could hear that Luo Nan's words had stirred something, but no one could guess the specific trigger. Whether it was the front deck or the group of friends, no one responded for a time. In the end, Luo Nan laughed, since you're not sure which one it is, then don't put your mind into pondering over the most troublesome part. Poseidon certainly isn't the only extraordinaire level mutant in the Pacific Ocean, right? That's true. Just the South Pacific alone is a bit more active. You can put together a table of mahjong. I won't play mahjong with them today. Zhang Yingying gave him a virtual kick, forget it. I'll go ask the boss and see what she says. Maybe she already knows what's going on. Meng Chong spoke at practically the same time, Mister, it won't be easy to disperse the shoals of fish and mutants that have followed us. But it's best to specially deal with that cow ghost. What Meng Chong said was a prudent argument. It was very clear that the cow ghost was a key point. Before the other side showed any obvious hostility, it might be better for both sides to chase the unstable factors far away. Luo Nan went, "Oh," before he could respond. Not too far away on the surface of the sea, the cow ghost made another turn as it fled. It practically stuck to the front of the enormous waves stirred up by the gales ahead. It was like a Qigong expert chasing a cicada in 8 steps on a precipitous wall. With a few successive strokes, it borrowed the force of the waves to quickly make a turn. It stuck to the enormous waves that had already rolled inward, narrowly avoiding the pursuit from behind. Right now its direction was already parallel to the direction of the yacht. Comparatively speaking, the battleship's slicing blade was reckless. Its charging momentum didn't decrease in the slightest as it forcibly pierced through the enormous waves. It was as if it was a thin piece of paper. Similar scenes had already occurred many times before. One didn't need to look to know that the mutant blade eel would once again cleave through the enormous waves in less than half a second to slaughter its way back. Therefore, the cow ghost, which had just avoided a calamity, didn't stop at all. Its 8 sharp limbs lightly sliced across the surface of the sea. Neither the waves nor the mutants within the waves were able to obstruct it in the slightest. It chased the side of the yacht, and in a few moments, it had snatched some distance from the bow of the yacht. It was about to begin its next round of detours. But this time, it didn't snatch it. It was as if a solid wall had suddenly been erected in the air in front of the yacht. It was formless and colorless, but it was harder than steel. This fellow's head smashed into it, and its entire body shook violently. It wasn't able to move even a millimeter forward in space. Practically all of the rebounding force acted on its body. It only stiffened for an instant before going limp. The yacht just happened to catch up to it at high speed, sending it flying. It then ran over it a second time, submerging it within the dense flood of seawater and living beings. Chapter 994. Not only did Luo Nan and the others on the front deck see the entire tragic fate of Niugui, they also heard the 3 consecutive sounds of impact. Even the violent winds and giant waves were unable to completely suppress it. It felt like the bones and muscles were completely shattered. It was hair-raising. Actually, the battleship's slicing blade that pierced through the giant wave earlier than Niugui did not return at all. After the wave that obscured their line of sight smashed down, the swift and fierce gray figure could no longer be seen. Zhang Yingying didn't even have time to enter the cabin when she saw these changes. She was a bit stupefied. What's going on? And over there? Did it run away? It's dead. Huh? Luo Nan could confirm that the instant the battleship's slicing blade pierced through the wave, a small portion of the seawater that had been sliced apart instantly condensed into extremely fine crystals. It formed a hollow blade ring along its path of travel, and the internal diameter of the extremely sharp crystal tip was just a bit narrower than the battleship's slicing blade. The body passed through, from head to tail, the abdomen was cut open, and the back was completely torn apart. If the body was going to be put into the pot, then a few more cuts would have been enough. Luo Nan grinned. Her Majesty Empress Wu was truly ruthless. Both techniques were simple to the extreme, but the crystallization of the body and the diamond wall of energy were both sharp and hard. They were practically done to the extreme. This was the effect of pure material conversion, but it was created by the extremely efficient mutual interference between the mental and the material. Luo Nan could only see this. Then he understood that Her Majesty Empress Wu's strength, especially her understanding of material properties, was truly unfathomable. No wonder she was able to invent a godly technique like the condensation ring. Luo Nan couldn't help but think at times like this. This lady just became an extraordinary half a year ago. She must be lying, right? Regardless of whether she was lying or not, Her Majesty Empress Wu was undoubtedly doing this to express her attitude. She was expressing a meaning to the fellow spying on her in the dark. She had no inclination for now, but she was seriously dissatisfied. Her Majesty Empress Wu's attitude was established, but the other party didn't make any intense reactions. However, the feeling of spying still remained. It was extremely stable. Well, it would be strange if it wasn't stable. Zhang Yingying received a call at this time. Boss says that this is a coward. She doesn't have the mood to care about him. She'll leave him to you. Oh, okay. Luo Nan answered quite delightfully. Luo Nan had no objections to the arrangements of Her Majesty Empress Wu. After all, the abnormal gathering of marine aberrations that served as the spy tools for the so-called cowards was mostly his fault. Of course, he had to bear part of the responsibility. Besides, he did not want to simply drive them away and clear the area. On one hand, his experiment could not be interrupted. He knew that there were problems with some of the experimental subjects, but time was tight and the experimental conditions were limited. It was not easy to gather a large number of experimental subjects, so he had to be careful every minute and second. On the other hand, it's really interesting. He was studying the magneto-optical mica, which had a high degree of interference with the will of living beings, when a fellow who also had some kind of control ability followed him without a sound. Is it a coincidence? Luo Nan didn't quite believe it. Even if it couldn't rise to the level of a conspiracy theory, perhaps it was some sort of special attraction. This phenomenon was worth studying. It was precisely because Luo Nan had agreed too quickly that many people were rather suspicious. Did someone want to cause trouble again? Luo Nan chuckled under Zhang Yingying's suspicious gaze. He reminded her with good intentions, Her Majesty Empress Wu seems to know who that fellow is. Aren't you going to ask? This. Zhang Yingying was the one who brought it up first, but she was a little hesitant. Go. Bring back some good news. It's best to reject the option of Diamond K, don't forget about your friend who's worried for you thousands of miles away. Luo Nan didn't wait for Luo Nan to continue persuading her. The group of people in his group of friends had already reached out with their little hands one after another. They wanted to drag Zhang Yingying to find Her Majesty Empress Wu in order to alleviate the hunger brought about by curiosity. If the boss doesn't want to talk, then what's the point of looking for her? Though she said this, Zhang Yingying was unable to restrain herself. She scratched her hair, which had been drenched by the seawater, and made her way to the back of the cabin in 2 or 3 steps. She turned her head fiercely just as she entered the cabin door. She stared at Luo Nan. Why can't I be at ease? Don't mess around by all means, okay? Luo Nan looked at her innocently. What the hell are you talking about? This was clearly arranged by Her Majesty Empress Wu. Luo Nan's calm attitude was more or less a bit confusing. Coupled with her soaring curiosity, Zhang Yingying went to find her boss in the end. Only Luo Nan and Meng Chong were left on the front deck. Luo Nan maintained his silence when he wasn't asked. He was like a statue. He wouldn't budge an inch even if great waves crashed against him. Aside from his body that occasionally flickered with red light, there was nothing else eye-catching about him. Luo Nan didn't like it, but he was more accustomed to this sort of atmosphere. He narrowed his eyes, and his senses began to focus. They pointed toward the gloomy sky, deep within the cloud layer. There, the special structure of mica was spreading out, covering a wider and wider region of the cloud layer. It also formed an even closer two-way connection with the enormous number of life forms in the sea. Why did Luo Nan's experiment have to be shifted to the sea? This was because the mica, which had already touched upon the edge of the prototypical lifeform's matrix configuration, could only have the space to further transform itself through the high-frequency, dense, and repetitive connection with a large number of life forms. This was also the foundation for the fantasy school to realize the leap. Luo Nan referred to the theories and materials of the fantasy school, and he knew what he needed to do. He firmly held on to the cornerstone of the superconfiguration theory. He wasn't in a rush to seek high-end results. Instead, he carried out design on the fundamental level of matter, evolving it step by step, observing it extensively, and filtering it. Luo Nan had done things very well before. He relied on the half-ruined brain array of the cloud organism to derive and evolve the basic structure of the magnetic optical mica step by step, forming the results of the mica. But as he continued down the path, especially in the aspect of observation and filtering, it really wasn't an easy task to obtain sufficient basic data in order to ensure the experimental environment. The magnetic optical mica was a fantasy school. Its ideal environment for growth was the collective fantasy and belief projection of millions and millions of highly intelligent life forms. Even though these basic tasks had already been somewhat replaced by highly generalized configurations, a need was a need. It was impossible to completely replace it. Just the few dozen people on the beach weren't enough to support the necessary environmental conditions. Of course, the population would be denser if the experiment was conducted in a super metropolis like T-City. But Luo Nan was embarrassed to conduct this kind of experiment on ordinary people with unknown dangers. Plus, the moods of modern people were complex and ever-changing. Their thinking was light and not thick. For a newborn mica, this really wasn't a good resource. The average level of intelligence of marine species was far inferior to that of a metropolis if the experiment was moved to the sea. But as the largest unified biological chain on Earth, it was reasonable to carry out an idealized combing and rectification of the laboratory type on the basis of the powerful desires and instincts of the large number of mutants. Reality was just like this. As the mica cast out millions and millions of control lines, it unceasingly rubbed and interfered with the life forms of the ocean. Within its structural system, a kind of subtle and fine characteristic that exceeded the design structural function itself suddenly appeared and then flickered and extinguished. And with the passage of time, the mutant species that possessed a higher level of intelligence gradually increased in number. The number of times the electrical fire appeared grew more and more frequent. The time it existed grew longer and longer. At the same time, it interfered with the material and mental planes, forming a buzzing noise. This kind of weak psychic wave was quickly submerged in the chaotic atmospheric environment on the material plane. Only a small amount of traces remained on the mental plane. But the level of effect they had was extremely high. The vast majority of them were in the abyss region. Only an extremely small amount was unable to avoid leaking into the sea of consciousness due to the existence of the millions and millions of control lines. In Luo Nan's eyes, the process of the psychic wave's creation and annihilation always radiated a complex and unique radiance. If he were to boldly consider it, could this be magnetic light? The magnetic light of the magneto-mica? Luo Nan needed to verify whether this was reality or just a figment of his imagination. But at this initial stage of seeing results, the coward outside of the experimental design, the factor, appeared. Luo Nan needed to divide some of his energy to distinguish and analyze this unexpected factor. He needed to evaluate its influence on this series of experiments. If there was no major interference, then it was fine. Otherwise, of course, he needed to deal with it as soon as possible. Luo Nan still did not know who the extraordinary level expert that Her Majesty Empress Wu called a coward was. He was unable to find its specific location, but it wasn't completely impossible to say that he had no understanding of it. From Luo Nan's perspective, the characteristics of the extraordinary were quite easy to identify. This coward had done something to the bodies of large numbers of shoals of fish and mutants in advance. It had collected information and disseminated it in a manner similar to radio. Then it was received, making it impossible for others to determine its location. However, the collection, aggregation, and transmission of information were not the natural abilities of these marine life forms. In order for them to complete this task, some modifications were needed, more or less. In a similar situation, some organizations of orders, such as the two members of the Amaterasu order and Luo Nan, sometimes used the method of believers. They used the power of faith on the mental plane as a base to build a kind of super-connection structure in the pure mental domain. Then it seeped downwards to share the perceptual framework of the believers, achieving the effect of, what you see is what I see. The super-connection of the believers was relatively restrained. If the God only used the perception of the believers in a pure and one-sided manner, and if the God did not interfere frequently and forcefully, it would be hard for Luo Nan to detect it. Walking on the street, one could tell who belonged to who order with a single glance. Who was a believer? In any case, Luo Nan was unable to do it. But clearly, the coward didn't use this method. Luo Nan raised his eyes to look at these marine life forms. The modifications they received were relatively more extroverted. At least, this was what Luo Nan believed. Chapter 995. At this time, Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts were shuttling in and out of the cloudy mica. They flowed through the millions and millions of control threads, and they even followed the control threads to pass through the surrounding marine life forms. Most of the time, he looked at the whole, but he would sometimes focus on the individual. From his perspective, perhaps a single control thread was nothing. But when these nearly incorporeal threads formed groups and bundles, they stroked the boundary between the material and the mental. They permeated into the body and soul frame of every living being. They actually had quite the effect of a syncopator. This kind of infinite syncopation, infiltration, and even dissociation towards the fundamental level was like the most thorough X-ray vision. He could clearly see the inside and outside of the target. At the same time, he used his high sensitivity towards the superconfiguration system to unearth the deeper meaning of the system's structure behind the basic module functions. Under this kind of clairvoyance, the whole and the individual reflected and analyzed each other. The targets that had been tampered with, what kind of differences existed in the depths of their body and soul structure compared to a normal life system? What kind of commonalities did these differences manifest? How did the individual operate? How did they integrate with each other? All sorts of things were peeled off layer by layer, appearing clearly. After seeing so much, Luo Nan wasn't too sure if this was the ability of the mica itself, or if it was a reflection of his own thoughts, or if it was a completely new system that interfered and influenced each other. From the looks of it, the possibility of a complete restoration of the magneto-optical mica was very low. For a configuration designer, certain signs were like sprouts that had just broken through the soil. Even if it was in its initial stage, whether it had grown crooked or not, and how it was nourished, Luo Nan could roughly see it. Luo Nan couldn't help but ponder a bit more, but these thoughts only flashed in his mind before they were soon annihilated. This was because this was something unavoidable. Using the natural evolution mode of primal chaos meant that one had to bear this kind of result. Cosmic object analysis. He had always been used to this kind of joke. If a magneto-optical mica could be casually replicated, then the sky of the heavenly Yuan Empire would have long been covered by mountains of clouds. Luo Nan didn't forget that his ultimate goal wasn't to create a magneto-optical mica. He just hoped to obtain the corresponding basic structure and extrapolate the space-time parameters on this basis. It was fine as long as they were roughly the same. He wasn't picky. In any case, under this kind of clairvoyance, the following torrent of marine life forms had practically no secrets from Luo Nan. He could analyze and separate the aspects of the system from multiple levels and dimensions. He could even try to restore the evolution process of the entire system with the superconfiguration theory that he was gradually familiar with. Luo Nan was able to confirm that foreign parasites more or less existed on the bodies of all the marine life forms that had been touched. It looked like a fish or a bug that had drilled into the target's body. The half that had drilled in had melted and fused with the host's flesh and nerves. In this way, it was partially modified and penetrated the host's body layer by layer. There was still a small part that was exposed outside as an antenna for receiving and sending signals. In this way, a parasitic device was formed. From the looks of it, this flesh parasitic device did not have much of an intention to usurp the host's position. Most of the hosts were still unaware of it. Ordinary fish were still muddle-headed, and the tyrannical aberrations also possessed self-awareness. At most, they would unconsciously gather and transmit some information. However, Luo Nan didn't forget about the battleship slicing blade that had its belly split open. Overall evaluation, interesting, but crude. What was interesting was that this kind of biological method could carry out limited modifications and control of the host. It was simply a kind of flesh dynamo core. It was peculiar and quite effective. It was crude because it was affected by the characteristics of living things. The host was different, and the effects were different. It was also affected by repulsion, producing different degrees of mutation. Its precision was really not high. Therefore, a large number of similar devices were needed to be assembled together to form a cluster layout. This was to eliminate the effects of errors and to restore and transmit information more effectively. As for the final score. Amazing. Luo Nan felt that some methods did not depend on precision. Instead, it depended on whether the direction was correct or not. His own knowledge and insight were mostly formed from the fragmented information flood of the Sunwheel Prison and the Mist Labyrinth. His system wasn't that great. However, thanks to the external neuron, he had several dozen hours of training in the Innerverse simulator. This allowed him to possess a relatively clear and advanced system insight. Right now, when he judged something, he would unconsciously use the standards of the Heavenly Yuan Empire to measure it. He wanted to see what kind of position it occupied in the Heavenly Abyss civilization's academic system of generic knowledge, specialized knowledge, and the Heavenly Ladder. With this sort of insight, the depth of many problems was expanded in an instant. Things like the flesh dynamo core had quite a market in the Heavenly Yuan Empire. It was usually used on permanently growing dynamo cores. It involved extremely high-end research in genetic engineering and smelting furnace layouts. Even though this sort of parasitic method was extremely backward, with uneven infiltration and transformation, and quality needed to be exchanged for quantity, the level of the method could be reflected. How to integrate these uneven devices into a relatively smooth system, how to effectively carry out information filtering and control, and even how to form a special domain structure. Wasn't this the homework Luo Nan had forced Hood, Shi Xinhe, and the other experimental devices to work hard to complete during his beach experiments? This was a confirmed path that the Heavenly Abyss civilization's advanced system construction research had already verified. Even the super configuration theory had a considerable portion built upon similar experience and theoretical foundations. It didn't matter if this coward was doing this intentionally or if it was just a coincidence. Luo Nan just happened to walk on this bumpy yet bright path in the path of mutation evolution. Luo Nan needed to pay special attention to him. It was fine if he was right once, but he was right twice in a row. This was a true power, no doubt about it. Luo Nan's observation and judgment of the coward continued, just like how the other side continued to monitor and evaluate him. Everyone was restraining each other quite well. Not only did the other party have a tolerant attitude towards Her Majesty Empress Wu's methods, even the control over the mutant sensors in the surroundings was very good. Apart from the battleship slicing blade, the others were only used as sensor units. Without further control, most of the mutants were still ignorant and unaware. Luo Nan could endure the side effects of having a large number of parasitic and transformed mutants constantly monitoring him for the sake of continuing his experiments. On the other hand, the millions and millions of control threads that Micah had cast were similar to what the other side was doing. They were merely observing and experiencing the complex interactions between living beings. They had yet to truly control anything. Therefore, the two completely different control systems had very little influence and interference with each other on the same target. They were separated by a thin layer of paper window that could be broken with a single poke. They contrasted with each other, creating shadows. It was both tense and interesting. At least, this was what Luo Nan thought. Since the other side had this sort of attitude, Luo Nan's personality wasn't suited to use overly active methods. He would observe first. Luo Nan didn't take any action for a period of time. He just minded his own business and did his own experiments. He continued to observe and collect data, searching for the most suitable direction for Micah's development. Zhang Yingying ran to the driver's seat to inquire, but the result was as expected. She ended up without any problems. Her Majesty Empress Wu was all smiles. She was very cordial, but she just said things like, "It's hard to confirm," and, "I'll just observe a bit longer." Then she minded her own business and enjoyed the joy of driving to the limit. She completely ignored Zhang Yingying's coquettish behavior and Luo Nan's wailing in the group chat. Comparatively speaking, Luo Nan appeared to be a bit more honest. He took some time out to observe some of the circumstances, mainly the key elements of the parasitic transformation, into the group. He let everyone satisfy their cravings, and he helped them look up information in passing. Unfortunately, even a master of information retrieval like Bamboo Pole would not be able to find the correct answer in a short amount of time. After all, the ocean was far too vast. After the era of distortion, old species were dying and new species were born every moment. Comparatively speaking, human research and exploration was far too lagging behind. Moreover, research on extraordinaries was still mostly confined within a small circle. It was relatively closed off. Everyone was at the peak of their lives. No one was willing to place themselves on the dissecting table so early, right? The work of clarifying the identity of the coward had temporarily come to a standstill. Luo Nan didn't pay too much attention to it. Right now, his main focus was still on researching and collecting more basic data. He wanted to experience the special life and death mechanism of magneto-optic. He wanted to attempt to use superconfiguration theory to explain and restore it. Or perhaps, he wanted to give it a more concrete configuration. Frankly speaking, his progress in this area was even more stagnant than his work on identifying the identity of the coward. Luo Nan knew where the crux of the problem lay. Right now, there were already 70 to 80,000 marine life forms built around the yacht, including ordinary shoals of fish and mutants. They formed a shallow sea life zone that extended for several dozen nautical miles. There was no lack of powerful C-rank and B-rank life forms. They had already begun to rely on their instincts to occupy territory and food. Conflicts of varying sizes erupted in the hundreds. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the sea had turned red along the way. There were countless corpses. Luo Nan heard from Zhang Yingying that this abnormal gathering had already attracted the attention of the Coastal Defense remote sensing satellites. They had already made 3 or 4 phone calls, but they didn't follow up after learning that Her Majesty Empress Wu and Luo Nan were here. But the problem was that the number of creatures squeezed together was close to 100,000. Compared to the growth and evolution requirements of the mica, the base number was far too small. After all, the base number of normal magneto-optic mica to help it grow was in the hundreds of millions. Of the 70 to 80,000 life forms, the majority were low-end shoals of fish. On this basis, rubbing the psychic waves of magneto-optic metamorphosis could only be done. They flickered and disappeared. They weren't on a large scale. Even observation was strenuous, let alone analysis and reconstruction. Luo Nan had tried his usual method of sketching, hoping to trace and leave an image of the magneto-optic. However, the life and death of the magneto-optic were indeterminate. Even though it flashed in his mind thousands of times, it was still specious. He couldn't find a place to start. Luo Nan tried a few more times. He felt that his fingertips weren't condensing water vapor. Instead, they were spurting out electric fire. They crackled and splashed, it was a complete mess. Chapter 996. Calm down. Calm down. Even with Luo Nan's temperament, it was hard for him to not be a bit impatient after failing so many times. Fortunately, he reacted in time. He realized that he was a bit impatient for success, so he calmed down a bit. He simply split a bit of his energy to compare what he saw at the moment. He casually picked up his pen and drew a simplified sketch. He borrowed the hexayear several thousand kilometers away to copy it and send it to his group of friends. What the F***CK? The group of people who were searching for information or simply shouting, 666, to the side accidentally saw that Luo Nan had personally sent the message. It was a hand-drawn sketch. Those who knew of Luo Nan's current state felt a chill at the back of their heads. They felt that Luo Yui might crawl over from the internet in the next moment to chat with them face to face. Xue Lei didn't think too much about it. He was just curious. This is a shark, right? It looks like a mutant rat shark. It's commonly known as a hovercraft. It's the speed type. It can dash forward at high speeds while sticking close to the surface of the sea. Its instantaneous burst of speed can break the sound barrier. But that's all. Bamboo Pole was the most meticulous of them all. When Yingying gave the camera, this group of fellows were hunting in the periphery. Holy crap. These lines. You have quite the heavy taste. Octopus timely complimented. Hee, if you can draw an anatomical drawing like this, I'll give you my exact words. I'm a pharmacist, not a surgeon. But it really is beautiful. Also, this isn't an anatomical drawing. It's a 3D perspective drawing. Octopus clicked his tongue in wonder. Luo Nan's drawing really had a grasp on the application of lines to the pinnacle of precision. It wasn't just a simple design. It went deep into the flesh, the muscles, the bones, the nerves, and even the organs. There were practically no superfluous strokes. The fine branches and forks inside were like burrs, and they all conformed to the arrangement of the blood vessels and nerves. Of course, biological structures were complex, and there were also orders of magnitude differences in scale. Although this sketch was called a sketch, it didn't cover everything. At first glance, it was enough to see that the details were appropriate and the key points were highlighted. Bamboo Pole, Octopus, and the others didn't need to use their brains to see the perspective drawing of this mutant rat shark. There were a few key points that had been highlighted and highlighted. And with just a little concentration, one would be able to confirm that those parts were the core structures that the mutated rat sharks used to achieve extraordinary powers. There was also the germ-independent module, which had a mysterious function beyond this set of structural systems, as well as the deeper infiltration routes and areas of influence. Luo Nan had borrowed Micah's control line segmentation function to create a comprehensive reconstruction of the mutant rat shark. Using this picture, he chatted with his friends and sorted out his emotions. This is a more typical biomass transformation, but there's one that's not typical. It seems like the transformation didn't succeed. As he spoke, Luo Nan sent another picture over. He added, so even Her Majesty Empress Wu has differential treatment. The group fell silent. On one hand, Luo Nan had the qualifications to court death. The others didn't have the guts to do so. On the other hand, the newly sent 3D perspective drawing served as ironclad evidence. It really left everyone speechless. The subject of Luo Nan's most recent painting was none other than the cowardly mutant that had lured the cowardly mutant over. That fellow had smashed into the diamond wall of energy. Then, it had been rammed and then crushed by the high-speed cruising yacht. It looked to be in a much more miserable state than the battleship Slicing Blade, who had inexplicably died. But when Luo Nan looked at it, it was actually still alive. There really was a difference in Her Majesty Empress Wu's deadly hand. Both Her Majesty Empress Wu had subdued the enemy in one move. 2 unlucky mutants. One was dead, and the other didn't seem to be alive. In fact, it was still struggling, and its condition was getting better and better. Right now, the mutant ox was wrapped up by the mutant population within the seawater. It continued to follow the yacht, waving its limbs from time to time as it struggled to fend off the predators that attempted to take a bite out of it. As for its condition getting better and better. Perhaps it was because Her Majesty Empress Wu was being lenient. Or perhaps it was because Her Majesty Empress Wu had indeed gone easy on it. It could be seen from the 3D perspective drawing that Luo Nan had drawn that there was something similar to a fluid in the connection between its bulging chest and abdomen. It was interacting with the other regions of its body. No matter how vivid the finished drawing was, it was impossible to completely display the details of its movement. Compared to his friends in the group, Luo Nan was able to clearly see that it was actually a kind of dark green fluorescence. It was flowing out in an orderly manner. It looked like its function was to help the shattered muscles, bones, and muscles of the mutant ox recover quickly. From Luo Nan's perspective, the level and mode of the fluorescent fluid's function were a bit strange. Luo Nan's thoughts stirred slightly, and a set of control wires dropped down from the Mother Mica. They pointed directly at the mutant ox's location, adding a bit more material to it, allowing it to carry out a more detailed probe. His main probe point was the strange fluorescent area between the chest and abdomen of the mutant ox. Of course, he didn't overlook the outer layer of this area. The flesh parasitic device had already probed in, but the majority of it had been dissolved. The degree of dissolution had already far surpassed all the other parasitic marine life forms that Luo Nan had observed. The device was completely unable to display its proper function. That makes sense. Perhaps it was because the parasitic failure of the flesh dynamo core had attracted the extra attention of that coward. As for why it had failed, Luo Nan definitely had to look for the reason in the fluorescent area. The control wires that Luo Nan probed in didn't suffer from any power of dissolution. The mutant ox was currently struggling to survive. It was completely unaware of the penetration of the control wires. But the marvelous fluorescent itself clearly possessed a bit of an autonomous response. Its consciousness was much sharper than the mutant ox's. It was just that the effective reaction to the control wires had already far exceeded the reaction limits of the fluorescent light. There was only a slight fluctuation, and then there was nothing else. Being able to sense it was quite amazing. Luo Nan was more or less a bit surprised. In all fairness, the current mother mica, even if it was based on the magnetic photon mica, was still relatively small and weak. Luo Nan estimated that the intensity of its life aura on the material plane was roughly equivalent to that of a normal awakened. But this didn't take into account the special existence of its mixing with the water vapor cloud, as well as the higher-end super configuration system. Especially the latter. In order to realize the complex structure of the super configuration system and provide timely energy support, its core framework had long since probed into the abyss region. It occupied the first opportunity in the interaction and interference with the material plane. Then there was the infusion of configuration and super configuration theory. The nothingness of the control wires, which naturally carried out high-dimensional segmentation, seemed to be mixed with a bit of Luo Nan's pure observation ability. Under these circumstances, let alone the mutant ox, even a psychic extraordinary might not be able to clearly see through it in a short amount of time. The actual reactions of the hundreds and thousands of mutants in the surrounding sea region were powerful proofs of the concealment properties of the control wires, which were practically separated by a dimension. In comparison, the fluorescent light locked within the mutant ox's body was much more powerful. The fluorescent light was able to react in an instant. It was clearly on a different level compared to the mutants, including the mutant ox. TSK. From the looks of it, the one who dissolved the flesh parasitic device might not be the mutant ox, huh? Luo Nan very naturally made a preliminary judgment. Although the mutant ox was the one who carried and stored this dark green fluorescent light, it could be used by the mutant ox. However, the relationship between the two couldn't be simply defined as belonging to the mutant ox. Everything must have a beginning and an end. Luo Nan still remembered that he was currently sending the results of his observation to his group of friends. He had gotten used to this during class, so he brought everyone along to adjust their point of view to focus on this fluorescent light. This area is more interesting than the mutant ox. Wait for me to draw another map. We're going to zoom in. It's going to increase by roughly 2 orders of magnitude. The people in the group were certainly unable to follow up with the conditions of the live broadcast. They lacked direct perception. Shui Lei was a bit stupefied. What's 2 orders of magnitude? It's roughly on the micron scale. This way it'll be clearer. The internal structure is quite complex. The main thing is that there are a lot of impurities. Wait for me. The group went silent for a moment. Octopus was the first to yell, Zhang Yingying. Where the hell did you go? I'm going down. I'll be right there. With Luo Nan's current position, it didn't matter if his lecture was understood or not. He just needed to make a good record. Luo Nan didn't wait for Zhang Yingying to return from the cabin. He already had an embryonic form in regards to this fluorescent area. He turned the sketch around and even made a keynote. Look. The vast majority of these are impurities. If I'm not wrong, this is the interference structure of the mutant ox's own strength. Only this little bit, the place I've marked, has a core effect. This is a bit like a super inferior version of the dripping sword. Although there are many configurations, the only one that has eternal value is the condensation ring and nothing more. Were kids these days all this straightforward when it came to courting death? Luo Nan wasn't aware of the unspoken criticism of his friends in the group. He was just discussing the matter as it stood. Let's continue down. The precision needs to be increased. Wait a moment. You speak as if you're pressing a button. Octopus finally couldn't hold back from ridiculing Luo Nan. He dealt with molecular formulas every day. He understood better than anyone what the microscopic scale represented. Although the precision of Luo Nan's current intervention was still 4 to 5 orders of magnitude lower than the molecular level, he was able to use his own ability to probe down to the micron scale. He was able to capture such a complex image. This in itself was an inconceivable achievement. Also, this tone was far too hateful. But this time, the "wait a moment" took a bit longer. Zhang Yingying had already dashed down. She aimed the camera at Luo Nan and restarted the live broadcast. But Luo Nan's extended index finger paused his follow-up actions. It looked like he was in a daze, but it also looked like, there's trouble. Luo Nan finally opened his mouth, but his finger deviated from its original direction. It poked at the edge of the enlarged fluorescent area. The sketch had already been blurred, and the flesh-parasitic device was mostly dissolved. All that was left of this toy on the mutant ox's body was the shape of a cigarette butt. It barely hung on the outer wall of the muscle layer. But right at this moment, the tip of the remaining cigarette butt suddenly lit up within Luo Nan's perception. It was as if it had been reignited. It burned through the gaps between the mutant ox's flesh, and a faint fiery light seeped through. It was as if an evil eye had opened in that location. Chapter 997. Zhang Yingying turned the camera to aim at the direction of Luo Nan's finger, but she couldn't figure anything out. She helplessly moved the camera back to Luo Nan's face. Did something really happen? Rather than saying this was a question, it was better to say that it was a confirmation. It was the relief of finally hearing the second sound of boots hitting the ground. Luo Nan was unwilling to pay attention to her. Zhang Yingying also felt that she was being a bit excessive, but the facts were laid before her eyes. She really couldn't hold back her curiosity. After confirming that it wasn't a dangerous and sudden change of events, she pursued the question, have the other side attacked? Not yet, but we've been targeted. Haven't they been keeping an eye on us all this time? Passive radar and active radar are always different. Indeed, Zhang Yingying immediately thought of the cage theory. She used it as a foundation to carry out deductions. The situation Luo Nan was facing right now was suddenly far too complicated and far too dangerous. She suddenly didn't dare to speak, worried that she would disturb Luo Nan. Instead, Luo Nan grinned at her, it's nothing. It's fine for now. I just need to take a look. I might not be able to understand, from Luo Nan's perspective, the flames of the cigarette but really did play the role of an eye. The abilities it displayed were the abilities it should have in its complete form. Due to the destructive dissolution it had suffered long ago, its activity was close to zero. Its original sensing ability was also destroyed. But in any case, it was a receiving device. It could still become a highly effective interventional channel if there was a matching projection of power. However, it was just as Luo Nan said. The object that the other side was currently paying attention to was not something that could be easily understood. But then Luo Nan's smile froze a bit in the next moment. Zhang Yingying discovered the abnormality. There's light in the sea. It's an eye. Following Luo Nan's determination, starting from the reignited cigarette but within Niu Gui's muscles, Luo Nan's sensing range began to take Niu Gui's location as the center. There were hundreds and thousands of mutants of all shapes and colors in the surroundings. Flames ignited at different locations on their bodies, whether they were inside or outside, whether they were visible or invisible. All of them had evil eyes opening. Some things were different when they were on a larger scale. As time passed, the evil eyes in the surrounding waters became brighter and brighter. It was to the extent that from any angle on the deck of the yacht, one would be able to see the specks of ghostly fire amidst the rolling waves. There wasn't any temperature, and it didn't even reflect any specific silhouettes. Those tyrannical aberrations were reduced to a gloomy background, only to serve as a foil to this bewitching light, as well as the deep spiritual pressure hidden behind the light. Mada is in trouble. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but complain. At the same time, she aimed the floating camera at the sea below the deck, ready to adjust the focus to give these strange light spots a close-up view. But before she could complete her operation, these dim light sources, which Luo Nan called eyes, drove the heads and bodies of the thousands of mutants to twist in unison. They pointed towards a certain region beneath the yacht. That was where the struggling Nyogue was. They didn't only point at the ox demon, but also at the fluorescent area between the ox demon's chest and abdomen, as well as the incorporeal control lines that had already entered the fluorescent area and were being dissected. At the very least, this was what Luo Nan believed. Not everyone could be like Luo Nan, grasping deep-level information. But the extremely abnormal synchronization of the sea creatures was enough to give off a feeling of existence that made one's heart palpitate. It was like a heavy hammer striking one's chest. Even though she wasn't the center of focus, Zhang Yingying's breathing still froze for a short period of time in this instant. The lens failed to focus, but it just so happened to capture the most orderly and most terrifying scene on the sea's surface. Through a satellite signal, it was projected to Xia City, several thousand kilometers away. It was just that the group of friends was no longer in high spirits. Anyone could see that the situation on the sea's surface had already reached a point where it could explode at any moment. In reality, at the moment when the evil eye suddenly revealed itself, the inevitable contact and collision had already arrived. Frankly speaking, the opponent's performance so far could be considered restrained. No matter how their methods changed, their goal was most likely just to take a look. The problem was that when it came to matters on the mental plane, hidden was hidden, and visible was visible. When the power behind the scenes transformed from hidden to visible, direct contact was placed right there. Once it appeared, it would be impossible to stop. At their level, sensing was contact. Contact was confrontation. Confrontation could decide life and death. Who could remain calm and collected when a fatal threat was already at the back of their necks? Luo Nan was unable to do it. The opponent's control ability was also unable to reach the stage of transforming such terrifying psychic pressure into a spring breeze and rain. Luo Nan had to react. Compared to the yacht protected by Her Majesty Empress Wu, and his fake body that would not suffer any substantial damage even if it was smashed to smithereens, Luo Nan was most worried about the Mother Mica hidden within the abyssal region. After all, the opponent had already sensed it and displayed an enormous curiosity. Therefore, Luo Nan quickly projected his thoughts above the abyssal region. He revolved around the Mother Mica's hidden but fragile core configuration. He did his best to blur its specific location, and he began to construct layers of defensive power within the outer abyssal region storm. Luo Nan was worried that the improvised structure might not be strict, so he even brought the Blood Soul Temple of the abyssal region over. This allowed the temple to form a triangular formation with a balanced offense and defense. But all in all, Luo Nan still prioritized stability. This matched the opponent's performance of concentrated observation. Both sides had intentions and performances of restraint. However, both sides needed a sense of security and the corresponding measures they adopted. They would not play any positive role in reversing the current trend of the situation. At best, it was a slow poison. It slowly but firmly pulled the safe distance between the two sides closer and closer. Both sides' reactions gradually escalated. Just like now. Soul strength was frequently mobilized above the abyssal region. The range of interference increased dramatically, causing the chaotic environment of the abyssal region to become even more vile. It faintly resonated with the raging winds and giant waves of the central Pacific Ocean. The effects of the storm nearly erased the barrier between the material plane and the mental plane in a trance. They ran wantonly on an even vaster plane. In Luo Nan's perception, the space-time structure of the surrounding sea region, which was originally relatively smooth, was like a gear with poor precision. From time to time, the space-time structure would stumble due to bad grinding. It would even tremble and throb, making creaking sounds. The atmosphere began to become abnormal. The first to be affected was the long-distance information transmission channel, which was originally unstable. The live video broadcast in her friend group struggled for a dozen seconds before it was completely cut off. Zhang Yingying was no longer in the mood to record. She turned her head to look at the cockpit high up in the rear, but she was completely unable to see Her Majesty Empress Wu's figure. She also did not receive the corresponding message. On the other hand, Zhang Yingying felt inexplicably uncomfortable due to the movements of her body. It was as if the powerful wind and waves that were beating against her body had suddenly leaked electricity. She felt numb, and her hair stood on end from the stimulation. Zhang Yingying's own cultivation was not ranked in the inner world, but she followed by Her Majesty Empress Wu's side. Her knowledge and experience were quite extensive. She immediately thought that this was most likely the aftermath of the collision of super-powerful forces on the mental plane. She turned her head to look at Luo Nan. Luo Nan just so happened to look at her. He did not say anything. He just extended his hand and pointed toward the cabin door. Zhang Yingying opened her mouth to speak, but she soon pursed her lips tightly. She nodded slightly, and without any delay, she headed toward the cabin door. Meng Chong followed behind her without a sound. He maintained a distance that could protect her at any time. However, Zhang Yingying could not help but turn her head to look again after she entered the cabin. This time, she saw that Luo Nan's finger had inexplicably congealed with water vapor. Amidst the battering waves, Luo Nan began to draw a new picture. Luo Nan slowly sketched out a few lines, but he did not have a particularly clear train of thought. He relied purely on his feelings. He did not deny that he was somewhat unable to restrain himself in this escalating confrontation. And the confrontation mode on the mental plane was destined to be one where seizing the initiative in terms of distance and level was the only feasible strategy. Right now, the other side was certainly the one taking the initiative, but that might not be the case later on. The traces of the other side's power taking the initiative to interfere increased due to the activation of the evil eye. This allowed Luo Nan to capture a few directional clues that penetrated through the void. The other side was actually extremely skilled in disguise. It was able to fully utilize the special environment of the abyssal region to create all sorts of labyrinth-like illusions for the projection of soul strength. By the time it truly sank into the sea of consciousness and made direct contact, the other side was already a greatly distorted and abnormal existence. However, how could Luo Nan's innate ability of pure observation, which came from formatting theory, be just for show? These confusing methods really didn't have much meaning to him. The reason why he had yet to find the other side was because he had broken the soul cloak himself. The current range of coverage was far from its peak. But then again, the soul cloak didn't seem to be a fatal influence to a psychic. Plus, there was still Mother Micah. Mother Micah's action of unleashing the control lines could be said to be obeying orders. It could be said to be an instinct of existence. To a certain degree, it possessed a certain degree of autonomy. Therefore, no matter how Luo Nan's thoughts changed in the void, no matter how the tens of thousands of bright and dark evil eyes lit up the sea of consciousness that closely interfered with the surrounding sea of consciousness, Mother Micah continued to throw out control lines. Because of the sudden activation of the evil eye, it naturally added a few more waves. The parasitic devices of flesh and blood were segmented on a deeper level. It must be known that the segmentation of the control lines had never been a matter of fact. Instead, it rapidly advanced towards a deeper domain. This was tantamount to giving Luo Nan another dimensional reference. Therefore, Luo Nan felt quite good. He felt that perhaps the answer had already appeared halfway through a picture. In fact, there was a faint shadow in Luo Nan's mind right now. It's better for everyone to be a bit more fair. Luo Nan muttered to himself. The lines of his pen were practically flying. But then there was a pause. At the same time, his finger, which had transformed into the tip of the pen, was broken. The fine water vapor collapsed and Luo Nan was stunned. Actually, on the mental plane above the abyssal region, the collision between the two sides didn't give them any leeway to be stunned. They directly formed the most intense collision reaction. As for the material plane, the first to suffer were the aberrations around the yacht. The tide of living beings of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, were like a wave of high-voltage electricity. They violently twitched and pulsed as they broke apart. Enormous yet deformed and ugly flowers bloomed. Chapter 998. The collision in the abyss region and the impact in the sea roared, interfered, and resonated with each other, separated by a paper-thin boundary barrier between the mental and the material. The collision originated from the abyss region, but compared to the highly chaotic storm environment of the abyss region, the magnitude of the changes on the material plane was greater. The kinetic energy formed was fiercer and more direct. Close to 10% of the 100,000 marine life forms that were instantly electrocuted were aberrations. They weren't dead fish on the chopping block. They had suddenly suffered an unexpected calamity. They were stupefied, but most of them had their ferocious nature aroused. They couldn't do anything to the yacht for the time being. They also suffered the impact of the terrifying psychic pressure. They instinctively felt a bit fearful of the collision and interference in the core region. They scattered outwards one after another for a time, but they soon strangled each other again. They massacred each other in the surroundings. Whether or not one could survive under the extreme chaos depended on one's strength and luck. For example, the aberration rat shark that had just become Luo Nan's target didn't have the chance to display its speed advantage in the sudden eruption of chaos and slaughter. It hadn't recovered from the rigidity of being electrocuted before it was submerged by the dense school of fish that swarmed over. It never floated up again. This was an insignificant corner of the bloody chaos in the surrounding sea region. Moreover, it was only a superficial phenomenon. Luo Nan wasn't paying attention to the chaotic scene or the resulting casualties. Instead, he was paying attention to the more subtle changes on a deeper level under the impact of the intense bloody and violent emotions. These marine life forms, especially those aberrations that were parasitized, had violent emotions bred in the bloody environment. They stimulated the body and soul framework in reverse, affecting the flesh and blood parasitic devices. Not only did they not cause distortions, they were like a wave of reverse charging, causing the myriad of evil eyes to become even brighter. Even more changes were reflected in the deeper regions that the naked eye couldn't see. The state of the marine life forms was changing. The segmentation of the mica naturally penetrated deeper, performing a deeper segmentation on the flesh and blood parasitic devices. Therefore, Luo Nan could see that these flesh and blood parasitic devices, or perhaps the flesh and blood dynamo core, were more in line with Luo Nan's aesthetics. These little things seemed to have activated their hidden mechanisms under the restless emotions of their hosts. They became more active, more proactive, and more direct. They induced their hosts to quickly burn their life force. While they provided their hosts with extraordinary strength, they also compensated for their low-end flaws and raised their upper limits. Luo Nan felt that they could even faintly form the embryonic form of an array under the premise of being piled up in quantity. And the structure of this array was not the straightforward and invincible military array of the bloodshed land. Instead, it was more similar to the domain of extraordinaries, which was more suitable for handling high-level power. It was also in such a domain that the tyrannical power of the coward from afar began to approach, oppress, and transform. This was something that couldn't be seen in the natural equilibrium state of the group of mutants. Speaking of which, that coward might have really restrained himself earlier. This kind of berserk state should be the normal state of the flesh dynamo core. In addition, Luo Nan discovered that the number of evil eyes that opened grew larger and larger, and the visible brightness grew stronger and stronger. But this part of the sea grew darker and darker as a whole. The sky had indeed darkened, and the Pacific Ocean region near the equator had gradually become nighttime. But Luo Nan believed that the most important factor was the radiation effect of the power of the coward who had entered the arena. The densely packed evil eyes were the most eye-catching targets above and below the surface of the sea. But after the enemy's power entered the arena, the evil eyes had already retreated to a secondary position. They were even more like bait. When one's attention was attracted by these light sources, the predator in the depths of the darkness would truly launch a surprise attack. It would bare its deadly fangs at one. Luo Nan still had an accurate grasp of the overall situation under the segmentation of Mother Mica. He wouldn't be confused by this kind of trap. He actually had some ideas. This sort of hunting method wasn't very effective in a frontal confrontation. The reason for this arrangement didn't seem to be a profound design. It was more like the habitual instincts of deep-sea life forms. And in comparison to the abnormal darkness of the material plane, there was another kind of arrangement within the storm of the abyss region. It was as if an enormous lighthouse had been erected there. It radiated an extremely penetrating power at all times. The upheaval of the abyss region was built upon the foundation of the mutants that were parasitized by the flesh dynamo core. Through the mutation effect of the flesh dynamo core and the continuous and orderly arrangement of the array, the enemy was carrying out some sort of blending and replacement of the berserk life energy that burst forth from the hosts. As a whole, low-level things were replaced layer by layer with a higher-level power. It was a bit like the structure of a burner. In other words, it was in line with the basic logic of the formation and upgrade of extraordinary powers. From Luo Nan's perspective, there were some redundancies in this structure, but there were some details that were extremely innovative. The most unique point was that although it was built upon the foundation of flesh and blood, it didn't care about the losses. It forcefully crossed the boundary between the mental and the material plane, transforming into a flame on the mental plane. To be more precise, it was a lighthouse on the sea. It attempted to illuminate the sea of consciousness and even the chaotic situation of the storm of the abyss region. This was a bit similar to the military drill of the Heavenly Yuan Empire that Luo Nan had learned at the relay station. However, the military drill that Luo Nan had learned at the relay station was to deal with the extremely dangerous, evil environment. He had no choice but to carry out strict restrictions. As for this side, was it a map? In any case, the powerful radiation of the lighthouse was extraordinarily effective. Perhaps it was because the spiritual lighthouse that was formed from aggregation was different from that of a single ability user. It didn't have a clear direction and purpose. It projected its light in all directions. The radiation method was relatively even, without any bias. This method actually maintained the relative stability of the environment of the abyss region to a certain degree. This caused the paradox of sensing and interfering to be alleviated to a certain extent. As for that person, he was still hidden outside the light of the lighthouse that he had single-handedly created. Since the distance was still extremely far, the projection of power was extremely high-end. Whether it was the darkness of the material plane or the light of the abyss region, he was able to illuminate others from beginning to end. He hid himself, forever in the darkness. However, Luo Nan wasn't too far off in this regard. As mentioned before, the mica structure that he had designed was already quite high-end. It was tainted with Luo Nan's special trait of pure observation. Even in the abyss region, it was extremely difficult to discover and lock onto a target. And Luo Nan himself didn't build a solidified configuration in the abyss region. Right now, he was just improvising. He combined the general electromagnetic deployment method he had used before, the space-time structure fragment of his own sandwich domain, and a bit of the reverse interference effect of the condensation ring. He could adjust it at any time, twisting the storm turbulence of the abyss region to serve as a means of attack and defense. There was no point in being illuminated by the lighthouse. On the other hand, the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss region, that he had temporarily borrowed had more or less revealed some traces. This wasn't a big problem. After all, it wasn't a frontal assault. What Luo Nan was facing right now wasn't the problem of being exposed or not. Instead, he was being suppressed to an extremely passive state while being illuminated by the lighthouse. The mental attack of the opponent was of the highest level that Luo Nan had ever seen. It rampaged through the abyss region like a tsunami. Although it didn't have a particularly top-notch explosive power, it was because it continued to operate at a high level. Its foundation was a destructive power that could crush the vast majority of enemies into powder. It was truly boundless, like a natural disaster. Was there no need for the other side to take a breather? It was truly explosive. At this time, Luo Nan really wanted to rush to the cockpit, grab Her Majesty Empress Wu by the collar, and ask, "What is a coward?" "Your Majesty, is there some sort of misunderstanding between your understanding of cowards and everyone else?" Before Luo Nan could put his thoughts into action, the opponent's attack suddenly retreated above the abyss region. Luo Nan finally let out a sigh of relief, but he couldn't help but be puzzled. Another half a minute, and his defensive line really wouldn't be able to hold. Retreating at this time, did he finally reach his limit? But it didn't seem like it. Although the opponent's tsunami-like mental attack had retreated, the lighthouse was still there. And at this time, the originally unbiased, illumination mode had a slight change. Luo Nan could feel its subtle tendency towards the Abyss region's Blood-Soul Temple. To be more precise, it had an effect on the surroundings of the Abyss region's Blood-Soul Temple. Luo Nan pondered for a few seconds, and he suddenly came to a realization. The Abyss region's Blood-Soul Temple was probably borrowed. It was the most conspicuous and secondary location. In a certain sense, it was a bit like the evil eyes around the yacht, released for people to see. Did the other side suspect that this was a trap? This line of thought was measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Luo Nan didn't know whether to laugh or cry for a time, but he suddenly understood the meaning behind Her Majesty Empress Wu's coward. In the end, Luo Nan couldn't help but turn his head to look at the cockpit behind him. He didn't rely on his eyes to capture the target anyway, and Her Majesty Empress Wu wouldn't give him a clear answer. On the other hand, Zhang Yingying had already appeared at the foremost position of the cockpit. She looked down through the glass curtain wall, appearing quite worried. Luo Nan smiled at her and made an "okay" gesture. His fingers had already returned to normal at this time. Since he had promised Her Majesty Empress Wu full authority to handle this matter, it would be shameful if he didn't handle this matter properly. He had to think of a way to deal with this. And his own experiments. It would be too sullen if they were interrupted by this sort of inexplicable enemy. Though Luo Nan said this, it really wasn't easy to handle. That bro was really a coward, but his strength was really hard. The attack just now was just a prelude. Right now, the intense conflicts in the surrounding sea region, including the Abyss region, continued to decrease. The pressure on Luo Nan was also decreasing, but this was by no means a carefree situation. Instead, it was like a tsunami that was about to arrive. First, the tide would abnormally ebb to expose the potholes of the seabed, accumulating an even more destructive force. The further he retreated now, the more violent the momentum would be in the future. The other side's next wave of attack had yet to truly arrive, but Luo Nan could already feel the endless storm of the Abyss region moaning on the verge of collapse. Chapter 999. It looked like he couldn't quite hold on. Luo Nan was no stranger to battles on the level of the Abyss region. He had a relatively accurate judgment of the situation. Actually, once one reached this level, the veil would be lifted on many things. The mysterious atmosphere would be completely gone. In the end, the attack and defense of the Abyss region were relatively simple at the current stage of Earth. The vast majority of battles relied on mobilizing the never-ending chaotic storm of the Abyss region, which came from nowhere, went nowhere, and formed impact damage. Whoever could build a more stable configuration in the Abyss region, give more efficient interference, and extract purer power would basically decide the outcome of the battle. Of course, upon reaching the extraordinary level, the structure would already be a domain. It could be solidified within the Abyss region, continuing to temper and nurture. The techniques and methods grasped would certainly be more numerous, and it would form a unique domain characteristic. Luo Nan's short fight with Constance, Monroe, and a few other mental-type extraordinary verified this point. Gong Qi's fleshly body was destroyed by Luo Nan's scheme. His solidified configuration in the Abyss region was the first to collapse. It was unknown how many of his trump cards were killed before he could use them. It could be said that Gong Qi died sullenly. From Luo Nan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world and Luo Yuan's planar crossbow were truly superior in the Abyss region. The former had a strict structure and was practically flawless. The latter had the power of a domain that flew from beyond the heavens. They all gave off a feeling that they were unattainable. Compared to these powerful people who had already reached the top on Earth, Luo Nan had yet to confirm his solidified configuration in the Abyss region. The main reason was that he had the technique of pure observation. The interference effect of the Abyss region gave him a natural advantage over other ability users. He had more freedom to choose. Plus, his configuration design ability far exceeded his peers. He was more accustomed to improvising and seeking flexibility. There was another reason. Luo Nan had yet to find the path that suited him the most. This topic was a long one. There were also some subtle psychological factors. Putting these things aside for the time being, Luo Nan faced the tsunami-like momentum of the coward in front of him. Luo Nan was more or less regretful. He did not have a solidified configuration in the abyss region that he could use freely. It was truly a headache at critical moments. This was because the contest between mental type extraordinary could easily turn into an RTS game in a relatively long period of time. The process would be carried out according to the relevant process. Construct and expand the base, abyss region configuration. Gather and seize resources, control the turbulence. After that, it was scouting and eliminating the enemy. And if the first strike didn't work, then they would start to push the level of the army to a higher level, constantly creating difficulties for the enemy and creating conditions for themselves. They would continue to research and develop technology in an attempt to create even more powerful units in order to obtain an overwhelming advantage. For someone like him who didn't have a fixed configuration, it was the same as having to build a base from scratch. Technology, troops, and so on would always be one level behind. Of course, Luo Nan had his own advantages. His advantage was that he had cheats. Pure observation mode was equivalent to turning on a satellite hack. For him, the fog of war was as good as nothing. Even if the enemy was on full defense, he could roughly see the nature of the fog and choose a more targeted configuration to deal with it. This advantage in intelligence could often help him eliminate the disadvantages in the early stages, and it was even more effective in encounters. The problem was that in this battle, he was in a rather sorry state. Luo Nan wasn't too clear on whether or not his opponent had solidified his configuration in the chasm region. However, his opponent's ability to control the torrential storm of the chasm region was truly beyond imagination. Moreover, they didn't use any tricks, they just used a dignified formation to suppress him. Even though Luo Nan used the techniques he was used to in the past, he was still at a disadvantage in the face of this powerful and majestic power. But was this the difference in strength? Luo Nan was still a bit unconvinced. After all, what he had here was just a kite with the tattered soul cloak. He had no choice but to release it. It was a water vapor fake body. At best, it was a node that delivered energy. The mobilization of power was truly too much to handle. His opponent wasn't here with his real body, but looking at the tens of thousands of marine life gathered in the surrounding sea region, there were large amounts of parasitic dynamo cores. Their carriers on the material plane were quite impressive. On one side is a battery, and on the other side is an ultra-high voltage transmission line. There's no way to compare. Well, this was what Luo Nan had brought upon himself. He had chosen the difficulty level himself, so he had to grit his teeth and fight to the end. Luo Nan had given the coward the opportunity to fully display his abilities, so he had to swallow the bitter fruit that came with it. After this wave of attacks, he had to resist the next wave of even more terrifying tsunamis. The true tsunamis always had a direction. His opponent had utilized the complex environment of the chasm region to the greatest extent, hiding himself tightly. Luo Nan had some ideas regarding his opponent's position. Even though he didn't know his foundation, the outline elements outlined in his mind grew clearer and clearer after a few rounds of pondering. But in the end, his heart palpitated due to his opponent's intense reaction. For the time being, he didn't have any thoughts of drawing the psychic diagram. Everyone was still in a stalemate right now, and they were all using clones and long-range gestures. Overall, they were all under proper control. It seemed that Her Majesty Empress Wu had a bit of a friendship with the other side. Luo Nan didn't want to let the conflict intensify and inexplicably recruit another powerful enemy. But in this way, his options to break out of this predicament grew fewer and fewer. Less was good. Focus. Since he didn't have the leeway to choose, Luo Nan calmed down completely. During this window of time when the tsunami was about to arrive, he temporarily didn't care about the situation in the chasm region or the changes in the surrounding sea region. He just collected his mind and sensed his temporary body. Luo Nan earnestly sensed the water vapor that made up this body. He sensed the complex processes of disintegration, flow, exchange, and reconstruction under the impact of the violent winds and waves. He also casually verified a few structural patterns he obtained from dumb sand in the beach experiment. He waited until he felt that it was about time. Actually, it didn't even take a few seconds. His core telepathic thoughts suddenly soared high into the chasm region and connected with the Mother Mica configuration. His mind was entrusted to the Mother Mica. A large wave came crashing over in the next second. Luo Nan's body suddenly transformed into droplets of water and foam, collapsing and disappearing without a trace. The unforeseen event happened too quickly. Zhang Yingying, who was in the driver's seat, suddenly rushed forward a step. Her head and palm collided with the glass at the same time. Only then did she suddenly remember. The Luo Nan in front of her was simply condensed from water vapor. But what was she doing? It felt a lot smoother. In the end, Luo Nan couldn't compare to when the soul cloak was at its peak. The fake water vapor body projected over was no problem for him to deal with normal situations, but it would certainly be very difficult for him to deal with a psychic expert of the extraordinary level. Not to mention that he had to split his attention to other things. He had to leave a considerable portion of his mind with the Mother Mica. This would only pointlessly divide his limited energy. So Luo Nan made a prompt decision. He made a choice. He projected the soul strength of his avatar directly into the Mother Mica. He allowed this simple energy node to truly become a battery. It was no longer a separate structure. All it did was provide the Mother Mica with energy support, allowing the Mother Mica to use its own method to deal with the upcoming challenge. This could be considered as helping Luo Nan take a step further in his experiments. Luo Nan had never forgotten that his most important task right now was to verify the quality of the Mother Mica. He had to strive to reach a usable and referential level. Everything else had to be pushed back. Momentary success or failure didn't count for anything. Even if he was defeated by the coward in front of him, he only had an avatar here. He also had the support of Her Majesty Empress Wu. Would his life be in danger? Right now, he had to expose the problem. The more thoroughly he exposed it, the clearer the direction of his future adjustments would be. So Luo Nan's train of thought was set. The Universal Electromagnetic Layout Method, the Blood-Soul Temple of the Abyss region, the space-time configuration. All of it made way for the Mother Mica. He let this artifact, which was still extremely weak for the time being, possess miraculous qualities, face off against the coward over there. Well, of course, he wouldn't fight it head-on. Luo Nan didn't forget that the Mother Mica wasn't up to standard in terms of pure life energy intensity. It was impossible for it to face off against an extraordinary. If Luo Nan allowed the Mother Mica to accumulate energy and let the next tsunami shake the Abyss region, breaking through all barriers, then there would be no need to compete. Luo Nan would immediately hug Her Majesty Empress Wu's thigh and cry for help. What Luo Nan did right now was to strike the Mother Mica midstream. As Luo Nan's train of thought became clear, an even greater amount of control threads were tossed out from the Mother Mica side as if they were free. Yes, they were free. The only things consumed were energy and computing power. And Luo Nan could still support these for a period of time. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even though Luo Nan's soul cloak was damaged, it had recovered over the past 2 days. In addition to the fact that they were on the ocean with abundant water vapor, the area it covered around the water vapor avatar exceeded the average standard of extraordinary. Luo Nan's senses were Mother Mica's senses. Right now, the area that the control threads spread out rapidly exploded from the few kilometers around the yacht to a diameter of nearly 100 kilometers. The depth of the control threads reached several kilometers into the deep water region. They practically stuck to the seabed as they swept past, and they continued to expand. They had already reached the level of flinging control threads at any living creature. Well, it wasn't that extravagant. The main goal was to target the coward over there and capture the target of its flesh and dynamo core's parasite. The first thing to do was to encircle it. Luo Nan had never been afraid of anyone when it came to the range of his mental senses and interference. This task only took 2 seconds of Mother Micah's time. Luo Nan received 100 times, 1,000 times more segmented information than before. This information involved all aspects of the flesh and dynamo core and its host. It was no small task to integrate and sort them out clearly. But this wasn't the most crucial thing. The most pressing problem placed before Luo Nan was to adapt to a new form. When all the information was absorbed and presented through the single channel of Mother Micah, the form of existence of this wave of information was clearly different from what Luo Nan had experienced in the past. Luo Nan was unable to see any form of flesh and organ structure within the visual information phenomenon. He couldn't even see the existence of too many substances. Most of the time, there were just ink-like shadows in the water, as well as faint fluorescent trails that flickered within the shadows.